Well, hello, good people of the early non-fun stream. We're gonna get started here almost immediately because I took forever setting stuff up. So let me inform people on my Discord server this is happening. Another kickbot, dude. I added so many banned phrases to the fucking kickbot, bro, and it's still, all the bots still get through, bro. They still get through somehow. Discord event stream room. Whoa, that's me. Is that non-fun? Can we get some non-fun W's in a chat? Yeah, we're gonna be talking to Owen Macdonald about socialism and the such. He's been in my Discord server for a bit. I think I don't know how he originally found me, but he's probably talked to a few people in my Discord by now. And I figured I'd have my own conversation, pee poo poo check, and have my own conversation with him. Real. So, yeah. He lives in the UK, so it's at, the reason this is so early is because it's, later for him. Let's drag him in here. Yo, what's up?
Hello? You hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Can you see me?
No. You have to, when I move you VCs, you have to return your camera on.
Right, okay.
Running. Oops.
Hello?
Yeah, hello? You gotta, I don't know exactly what button you hit. Wait, like I'm forcefully like moving UVCs, and Discord will like auto turn your camera off, and sometimes Discord like will have some button to go back to the original VC. You gotta turn your camera on again. So I don't really.
Okay, so if I do this, there we go. Right, now that's better. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Now.
Yep. Okay. Good. Let me get.
Awesome. How are you? All right?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty all right. I am usually not up this early. Okay, this is early for me. I'm on a streamer sleep schedule. Okay, but yeah, I'm doing pretty good.
Oh, awesome. I wish I were doing better. We've just had a big. England just lost the first game of the Ashes against Australia.
Oh, horrible.
So, you're probably not much of a cricket fan, I suppose. Non-fun. You're not.
I don't even. Yeah, I don't even pay much attention to the sports that are popular in America. So cricket is a. It's a bit far out there for me.
It may be some of your audience, so. But no, we're here to talk politics, right? We're here to think about the social world. And,
yeah, I guess
all these things.
Obviously, I've seen you. You've been in my Discord server. I've seen you chat with a few people from it. I didn't watch all your conversation with Vegan, but like Vegan is someone I know online, so I was aware that I have, and I saw you talk to Hamsters recently, and I saw you talk to North. I did watch the full thing with Hamsters, and I watched some of the parts that I cared about more of your conversation with North, which are all good conversations, and everyone in my chat should check them out later, okay, on Owen's channel, which I will eventually link somewhere. But
very kind, thank you.
I guess essentially it's sort of kind of the first thing, the broad things I want to talk about is like capitalism and inequality, and the sort of a little bit more narrow focus is kind of how we're arriving at our different conclusions with regards to the how good capitalism is, how bad inequality is, things like that, because I think we might just have maybe like totally different ways of arriving at these conclusions, and that might just be really affecting how sort of bad we view these things. So probably the first bit I want to spend a little bit of time on, but probably not that much time, is kind of one thing we were talking about on my Discord server a bit, just blog post that someone is making the argument that like inequality is not like intrinsically immoral, or that like equality is not intrinsically important. I guess do you kind of, when I say like intrinsically important, do you sort of know what I'm talking about there? Like,
yeah, like inherently, like as in in itself. That's right. What you're sort of implying here, right?
Yeah. So I think part of what might make us have different conclusions, like one of my, I don't know, you probably know roughly who Okonoboy is. Like one of the disagreements I've had with Okonoboy, whenever I have spoken to him, is that he like was an egalitarian. He did view equality as intrinsically important, and that was part of his justification for like having, you know, more socialist policies, or even saying like socialism is sort of his ideal system, even if there are some practical limitations on how far you could go with it. So that's maybe the first thing I understand your view on, is do we view it as a, you know, intrinsic good to increase equality? Is that something that's intrinsically inherently important?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think it's to sort of loop back to the article, right? Like if we lived in a world where everything was fine, there were no severe problems right now facing people, we were all able to live a free and fair life enjoying the fruits of human development, then I would agree there wouldn't be such an issue with people maybe having different experiences of life. And if we to zoom into sort of set examples, you and I probably have differences, we probably have different experiences of things, but you know, we're both able to come and sit on this stream. We both look like fairly healthy people. We're not in any severe danger or risk to ourselves. And so the differences in our lives, someone could measure, for instance, or see just from looking at us, wouldn't necessarily be the biggest consequence. However, we don't live in that world. We live in a world where people die a stone's throw away from food. We live in a world where people have different experiences of safety. You know, we live in countries that don't have warfare, but others do. And so when we're thinking about inequality, that is the focus that we're sort of really trying to get at. That's why we're maybe a little bit, or certainly people from my leaning and such, a bit reticent to accept the arguments of someone who'd say, well, do we need to focus on inequality? Is it okay to have this? And so I think until we come to that, until we come to the sort of better world for everyone, yes, it is important to think about inequality and inequity and all those sort of associated topics.
Right. But most of those things come off to me as you appealing to why inequality is like instrumentally bad. You know, why in the real world it might have, you know, negative effects, and, you know, why it's some important goal to focus on in the world that like actually exists. And I don't totally disagree with that, because I do believe there's instrumental value to equality. I do believe in, you know, there are gains to be had from, you know, redistribution, even taxing the rich sort of disproportionately. But like you say, like, you know, we have issues, like you said, like there's sort of issues with people that have like just these different experiences in life. And I agree it's an issue, but only instrumentally. So is the issue there the fact that they have these different experiences, have these inequalities themselves, or is the issue simply that, you know, the sort of material effect of these inequalities is, you know, that people they experience some suffering, they experience some depravement, they experience poverty. I guess, you know, it sounded like most of the things you were talking about were just poverty, were just the sort of instrumental things that I can see can totally be a relevant factor for these, you know, equations.
Well, it's both, right? You've got the material effect, of course. You know, if you experience this inequality, you are more likely to miss out on food or not have safe shelter and such. But it's also something we should be thinking about critically. We should be thinking, okay, why is it that someone in this country or in this part of town or with this experience is less likely to suffer from an illness or face a worse quality education, or in more extreme examples, be more exposed to climate crisis events or warfare?
That all seems instrumental too, right? We're just stating like the negative effects that we think inequality could have, and some of those things conceivably they could affect that, but that's not intrinsically.
But they are directly related, aren't they? Like there is the inequality produces the harm that we're trying to resolve.
But
Right.
that's appealing to, if you're just saying reducing the harm, again, that's appealing to an instrumental thing. You're saying that the sort of intrinsic thing that matters is the harm, which would be something I would agree with. And like instrumentally reducing inequality can reduce the harm. I agree, like in the real world or whatever, a lot of these things are going to be connected, but like I don't think your view on whether inequality is intrinsically important like should one depend on sort of facts about the real world. Like I think you should have like a more meta-ethical view, philosophical view outside of that. And two, when you appeal to the real world, it seems like most of the times you're just appealing to things that are accounted for with some type of inequality being instrumentally important.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't think we can separate the philosophical from the social world, the real world, because we're in it, right? Like it's not as though there's some, and obviously we've got different religious beliefs, right? I mean, maybe there's different attitudes we have to things and such. But right now, we're in the social world. We're on Earth in human society, and so, for me, that's what we got to focus on, right? Like for as much as, of course, someone could say, well, what about detached from the human world? What do you think about things externally? We're here now, and so the inequalities that we're being spoken about are definitely worth talking about as important things and as things we need to address. So
like what I'm trying to say with the first objection that I raise is like, for example, like people like I'm a utilitarian, and people say like, oh, utilitarian is like ism, it's like too demanding because it demands, it says that you ought donate some substantial portion of your money to charity. And one response to that, not the only response, but would just be to simply say like, well, that kind of depends about like facts and about the real world, right? Utilitarianism prescribes that because there's so much kind of low hanging fruit with how much good you can do by donating to effective charities in like some totally possible world, and maybe where our world would be, even 100 years from now, utilitarianism would not sort of demand that because there just would not be, the sort of low-hanging fruit where you could donate to highly effective charities that, is sort of substantially, have higher marginal utility than you get with the money that you currently have if you're a relatively well-off person in a developed country. Like that's what I'm saying when I say like you sort of like baseline philosophical view should kind of not be particularly affected by some of these types of facts about the real world. And you can say we live in this world or whatever, but I still do think like whether or not you view inequality as intrinsically important or not will affect how your intuitions, will affect your policy, will affect what you say about the real world. Like I do think like if you are a full-on egalitarian, like I mentioned again earlier, Conboy is, for example, then you have very strong justifications for being a socialist, at least in the ideal sense, even if you think there are some practical limitations to it, or even if you want to weigh it against some other variables like utility. Like if you believe equality is important in and of itself, you're going to be willing to go further to sort of to reduce the welfare of some people to make the world more equal.
Well, equality is important in that everyone should be able to have human rights and have the access to things they need to be able to live and such. And like I said at the start, it's not so much that we're thinking of everyone must have exactly the same experience in all measurable ways. It's world right now has severely different expectations of what someone's life is going to be like based on arbitrary, unfair things, and we've got to address them. Mm-hmm. And so let's think about what you said a second about donating to charity and such, and addressing social concern through things like that. I think
I was simply using that as an analogy. I'm not I love talking to people about my crazy beliefs about the shrimp welfare project, but I'm still using that as like an analogy to say like the sort of like baseline philosophical view, it should not be super heavily affected by like these types of facts about the real world. Like I don't consider I think
it should be though, because how do we think about the great ideas and the big ideas and such if we're not thinking about what we experience around us, the world we live in, and how we're informed by it? And I think that whilst of course it's great to think philosophically, we should always be rooted in how our actions and how our thoughts mediate through the actual lived society we're in, because that's where we are, right? That's what we have got to help our fellow person and be better for everyone. So I think there has to be some connection to what is in the real world.
Well, when you say connection, so in some sense there's going to be a connection, but again, it like when you, for what, it seems like when you appeal to the real world in all these cases, you're appealing to some instrumental value, and then like two, like you're I don't know how to get this correct. Well, for two, actually, again, I think your intuitions about whether or not more equality is intrinsically important will also affect your like real world stances. But it, like it's sort of, it's not like a the equality point. It's sort of, there's got to be a good way of phrasing this, but the baseline philosophical view, it's not a fundamental sort of feature. So for utilitarianism, like it's not a fundamental feature of utilitarianism that it is super demanding of you to donate to effective charities, because there's certainly a possible world in which it wouldn't be the case that many of these effective charities exist, because we've already solved substantially a lot of these issues. Like in the same way, I think like for egalitarianism, like your view should not depend on sort of what possible world you're in with regards to what is intrinsically important. I think if you hold something as intrinsically important, that should kind of be intrinsically important in all possible worlds. And we could obviously imagine a possible world in which people just had a lot of equality. And it seems silly to say that in that world we should no longer have equality be intrinsically important, just because everyone already experiences some level of equality and high standards of living.
Okay, but then I would say that equality is intrinsically important to some extent, right? Because you need to have, as a society, we should be thinking every human deserves the ability to go through a life without facing hardships. If we have a part of society where people say, don't drink polluted water, don't face malnutrition, don't live under the threat of repression and death and such from oppressive forces, then we've got to analyze that and say, well, why is this the case? Why have we faced a society where this is happening? And so I think that until we, like I said at the start, until we get to the point where we are genuinely living in, I don't know, like a Star Trek Westworld type perfect society, we do have to keep fighting for that intrinsic goal. And even after that point, we should still be, because it's not as though, we often, that I'm quite left wing, we often get accused of saying, oh, we just want a utopia and such. It's not as though I'm ever sort of saying, yes, what I advocate for is the perfect thing that would solve every single possible quandary. But it's about putting in place things and aiming for higher goals that allow us to better address the existing problems and thinking critically as a system. And so that's why I would say, yes, we should be thinking that there is a proper goal to addressing the social inequalities in the world, and should aim to have everyone be able to experience certainly the basic human needs equally across the globe.
Sure. So, I mean, if you are just holding that inequality is, intrinsically important, even in the possible world in which we already, have some level of equality or whatever, that's a position you can take. That's fine or whatever. I think there are flaws with that, and I guess maybe we can, we discussed that whatever if you want to, I guess, but are they like that? That's an intuition you have. That's just something that you view as intrinsically important. That's going to affect all of your other views on inequality, and I think that might explain some of the differences that we have or whatever. Because that's kind of what I'm curious about. Like when I'm considering my views on inequality or whatever, like the things I kind of look at to weigh on like how bad inequality is or something. I will weigh, I weigh my moral theory to some extent, but obviously I don't view inequality as intrinsically important. So the more important thing is to try to weigh to measure how bad the effect actually is, insofar as there are instrumentally bad effects. But I try to weigh just the opinion of experts, economists who have studied inequality, what they say on stuff. I try to weigh just what I know about economic theory. And this is true not just for inequality, but generally speaking, just kind of what I is there a causal mechanism for inequality having some bad effects just based on what I know about economic theories? Housing prices, maybe there's some merit to it there, but obviously inequality is not going to have some causal effect on irritable bowel syndrome, right? This is probably not just a mechanism there for that to happen. And I care about
It's funny you say that though, because I think that, I know obviously I get what you're saying, right? Because there are things that I would say most people also follow, right? They have preferred experts and academics and people of study who they lean on. Mm-hmm. They have their own ways of thinking about things and things they've read and such, which will inform their opinions. And obviously there's a social world around that as well, but which has an influence on how you think about the world. But The reason, and this is actually, I suppose, links back to what the sort of my issue with the article was, things like irritable bowel syndrome, but like a wider sort of health and lifespan and such, are directly influenced by the inequalities we see in the world. So if you are food insecure, if you are struggling to balance bills and paying rent to some landlord and such, and unable to access healthcare and such, these are things which make it more likely for you to have the adverse health effects that might make someone's life less equal and worse.
Right, so, but I guess so what I'm saying is, I'm curious, like, what evidence you're looking at with regards to, like, how big the effects of that are versus, like, how bad the effects of, any mechanism we have to reduce inequality, be it some union, be it some taxation or whatever, like, how bad those things are. Because again, like, what I'm saying is, like, the things I look at that lead to my conclusions, I try to weigh the opinion of experts. I try to weigh what I know about economic theory. I try to weigh the empirical evidence that we have available on these things, and try to account for how good the causal inference mechanisms are in various empirical studies or whatever to the best of my ability. And I guess, like, I kind of don't see what you're doing to arrive at the conclusion that inequality is going to have some, like, particularly big effect on food security. It's not clear to me that there's going to be some causal mechanism for that just from theory, and I don't believe there's any empirical evidence that really substantiates that.
I mean, I strongly disagree, but I think this is actually something you can see quite easily without necessarily even needing the papers and such, because if you have the money to be able to afford regularly buying food ahead of the rates of inflation and such, then you can afford to eat healthier and not have the same adverse effects as, say, someone who is food insecure, facing the harsher end of the cost of living crisis because they're at the lower end of the economic
that's just a matter
scale.
of low income, right? That's not a matter of
Which
inequality.
is an inequality, but it is because the
no,
person with
you
more
can
money
imagine
can.
a very equal society where everyone has enough money to buy food. In fact, to some extent, I think the U.S. has achieved this to some limited extent because we do have welfare programs, and to a broader extent, Norway has and stuff. I mean, I don't think. I mean, if you just look at social spending in the U.S., and, like, maybe you have different stats than I do, and I've seen you talk about this, like, in my Discord server about all the austerity we've been hit with or whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know. It definitely seems like just total social spending or total spending on, like, income security programs, and even, like, just spending as a share of GDP on this stuff, like, just has trended upward over time. Like I have data from Our World in Data, and, like, they keep track of public spending as a share. Public social spending as a share of GDP, that's been trending upward over time for the U.S. There was, like, a big jump during COVID, and it kind of went back to sort of normal. It probably went back closer to normal after that. Our World in Data, that ends in 2021 at 22.7% in GDP. I think I have, like, some other data sets here. Like, the OECD has their own data set. I haven't done a ton of research into what exactly are the differences in their methodology for what they consider social spending or not. But I mean, it's a similar metric. I think it's like 19% the OECD says, and that's been growing over time as well. So I don't know regards to what welfare programs in the U.S. have been hit with any type of heavy austerity, but I'm also just simply saying, like, clearly,
essentially, nonsense.
Essentially all of them.
So austerity, obviously, cutting the spending that happens for, or reducing the budget and such, and independence of various state bodies, so schools, transport, healthcare to an extent, things which the public can use as part of public infrastructure, and then handing this over or making it easier for market forces to come in and do things with it. And so austerity isn't just felt, I think, through one measure. You can't it's hard to measure it just as one stat isolated. It's all of those things.
I agree.
Let's say you're a low-income family, say, in America, and your president and such, and successive governments, and your governor, and all the sort of people that are in charge of institutions enact austerity. If you're relying on a program that, say, is in charge of ensuring your kid gets access to things at school, or ensures the bus routes run every so often to get you to work and such, you now have a harder time accessing the things in society that you need to get through it. And so
I don't disagree with that. The thing
impact on your well-being and such.
Sure, but so again, for one, like when you say, like, I agree, austerity generally can't be measured through one metric, but so like if the claim that you're making, like I said, the U.S. has already achieved some level of so originally where it started, right, is I'm saying the thing that you kind of claimed about like inequality having some effect on the availability of food. I said that seems to me to be a matter of just low income period. You could imagine a society where everyone just had a high enough income to buy food, and the U.S. has already to some extent achieved this because we have programs like SNAP, we have programs like TANF, which are definitely imperfect, but they do get money to buy food for a lot of people who need it. And European countries to varying extents have achieved this, sometimes even better than the U.S. And then sort of part of your response to that was, but these welfare programs have all been cut over time or whatever. Now, I agree. Austerity is not only, cutting welfare spending or whatever. It also includes things like privatization of public assets, which, to be fair, you have seen from the stuff I've seen, like over the long run, you have seen a decent amount of privatization of public assets across countries. But like, it just doesn't appear true to me that a lot of the welfare programs in the U.S. have been significantly cut. I think if you're measuring just since COVID, that's true for some of them because they were, temporary expansions. But on the whole, it seems like, public welfare spending, social service spending, that has just been trending upward over time in the U.S. as a share of GDP.
But the spending of money doesn't buy the same things it always does, right? Money
it's a share of GDP. I guess you could, I think it's a share of nominal GDP, not real GDP, but I'm sure I could find one that's real GDP specifically.
And also, population increase means there's more has to be spent. The point is that on the ground, the effects of it for people and for schools and such and critical institutions is one of constrained budgets, less ability to be able to enact the things they need to do to be able to support people, and then hard impacts on people. You said about the welfare state a second ago, and you're right, welfare states exist. There are things in place to sort of put a plaster or band-aid, I suppose you'd say in America, and on the inequalities of capitalism. The fact that there needs to be people helped at the bottom of society is what the welfare state is supposed to do. It's supposed to lift people from falling into the hardship of life and such, poverty and such. But there's three things I would say in response to that. Firstly, not everyone is able to access the things the welfare state is meant to do, as we're seeing increasingly because of austerity and because of this sort of increased attack on the welfare state that I was just describing. Secondly, it isn't necessarily enough to actually challenge what's going on here. So even if you receive the say SNAP benefits or the in my country the various benefits that you can receive from the government, it isn't actually enough to match the rising costs of rent, electricity, transport, etc. And then thirdly, they're still attacked by right-wing parties and increasingly far right parties who view it as just unnecessary spending that they could either pocket for themselves, hand to a private corporation, or I don't know, just spend on the military or whatever. So, and then fourthly, we'll come on to the fourth reason in a second actually, but those three, I think, should highlight to you that just saying, oh, well, there's a welfare state isn't enough to deter the fact that there is an inequality that should be addressed. Someone in the, I saw on the screen just now, someone said that a society could have everyone having equal access to food that isn't enough to survive and such. And obviously that, what we're sort of, when I'm saying equality, we're thinking about addressing the overall shape of society right now in society where there's enough food for everyone to eat, but people aren't eating. There's enough I think space for people to live.
I think he's again appealing to the sort of intrinsic aspects of it, but yeah.
But then that's, like to an extent, surely you can see that this appeal, there's a reason this appeal is happening, because it's something which is bad. It's bad that people can't eat when there's enough food. That's why it's been said, right?
Well, okay, so yeah, so I agree with that, but to me that's simply evidence that, like, when we say equality is intrinsically important, we're kind of overfitting an intuition. We're saying in the real world we observe, obviously, people not eating is bad, at least if this amount of suffering. Therefore, equality must be important. I think really what the mistake we're making when we do that is we're saying a true fact, which is that in the real world, it is the case that equality oftentimes has sort of these broad gains in terms of reducing suffering via taxation and welfare programs or whatever, and we're confusing that for something being intrinsically important, when I think there are sort of more issues with the view that's intrinsically important. Like, I think if we want to walk through some of the issues with that, we can. I know some of them were mentioned in that blog post that we initially had disagreements on, but just to first address some of the things you said, like, if we're saying despite this like welfare spending increasing, as a percentage of GDP, like the on the ground situation is one of people having constrained budgets or whatever, not being able to buy enough food. So again, like I guess I don't know what evidence we're looking at to see that, because I would imagine if that was kind of the case, you would see that show up in measures like the supplemental poverty measure, or measures like the consumption poverty measure. And I just don't think we see that. I think we see that as the welfare state has expanded, you see supplemental poverty go down, you see consumption poverty go down. I think that you see, I'm also just relying on sort of like causal inference studies that economists have done that try to compare SNAP and non-SNAP households and what they buy and their nutritional quality. And it seems like SNAP increases the nutritional equality of diets to people who receive it. It seems like it broadly has positive effects on early childhood. If you get SNAP when like you're under 5, you go on to have like higher earnings later on. So I guess like when you say these things, like I don't really know what data you're relying on to say that. I don't know how we're arriving at that conclusion, because it seems contrary to all the opinions of experts, to all the empirical stuff I've seen, and to all the economic theory that I know.
Okay. I mean, what you've just said is right? Like that program, there's a reason it was bad that Trump was going to axe it, right? Because it's good. It's good that people receive these benefits and are able to have a bit more and such. What we're saying is that it isn't quite enough compared to the sort of widespread problems in society to actually alleviate the overall problems. It's still an inequality, because you're having to rely on something which is pushing you just above the level of safety and such. And as the fourth reason I was going to say, in addition to what I was sort of thinking, is that we shouldn't we shouldn't need people to rely on welfare in the first place. We should, in a just society, we would address why the inequality exists to begin with, why there are people who need to turn to a government program to be able to get by in life and not die. And so that is also where we're trying to aim our lens of analysis and such. But I think that welfare programs, you're not going to. But I'm a socialist. I'm someone who's very left wing, but they are thinking pragmatically. Whilst we have this capitalist system, you need a welfare state. You need people in the government to be able to say, okay, well, actually, there are lots of people who are not going to be able to survive if we leave everything to the market. So let us intervene and help. Let us be able to allocate some resources to people, because we need to have them surviving, because it is morally and beneficially economically good to have people alive and not dying from malnutrition right outside the city walls and stuff. And so whilst of course this is good, it's something which is going to come under attack from people who are more market orientated, because of the inequality, because for their economic goals to be realized, they need to have that greater advantage and such. And so the reason, to try and loop all the things I'm saying back into one sort of central point, the reason we're criticizing the intrinsic inequality is because we're trying to think about the society we live in critically. We're trying to say, okay, why is it that people are reliant on an increasingly defunded, increasingly less capable of helping people welfare state? And ultimately that stems back to the organization of capitalist society. They have the direct interest of enriching themselves at the expense of everyone else as their main organizing goal. And so even when they aren't necessarily doing this with the intent of harming people, maybe even if they are just trying to think in business terms, they are pushing society to a point where the inequalities that exist in terms of money, resources, etc., leads to adverse effects for lots and lots of people. And I would say that we can see the data quite clearly because of the increase in costs of things, the adverse effects that has on people, the cost of living crisis, the or effects on health and such. And even though it's better than where we were pre-welfare state, of course, I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, the welfare state was bad. Never am I going to say that. Clearly, there is still a problem, and clearly things are getting worse in the 21st century, times fans say, which means we need to think critically about what is going on.
Sure. So I guess that was a lot.
Sorry,
to me, it didn't come off as your earlier claim was like the welfare state was good, but it didn't go far enough. To me, it again it came off as one, we're sort of claiming equality has some intrinsic importance, right? And then two, we're claiming these welfare programs, have been sort of under attack. They've experienced austerity, and I kind of pointed out, social spending in the U.S. is just in percent of GDP just has been going up. I'm fairly certain if you look at the number of households, or you should look at, I guess, the percentage of households that are on SNAP assistance. I don't have data on that right now, but I'm fairly certain that would be trending upward as well. We've given benefits to more people. Certainly, it's probably to people on government health care, Medicaid or Medicare. Certainly, that has been, as a percent of population, probably going up, if nothing else, because states like California, voluntarily take on Medicaid expansion. But I guess, that's on that point. If the claim beyond that is, well, I kind of don't think people should have to rely on welfare in the first place. We need to have some type of system that avoids these problems. I mean, for one, I think fundamentally most of these solutions or whatever are going to be pretty worker focused. It's going to be we need socialism is kind of going to help the workers earn more income. They're going to get a higher share. They're going to take some of the capital share, and maybe the capital share is socially owned by either workers or governments, and they can distribute it or whatever. And I think setting aside the other concerns for a second, I think even in that system you'd still have some people on welfare, because a lot of people who are on welfare are non-workers, right? They're elderly people or disabled people or children, and they can rely on family transfers, and you can have a family transfer income to them, and to the extent that you raise the income of people who are earning from working or whatever, that can help with that. But it also seems kind of unfair to have that burden sort of unequally distributed based on whether or not you happen to have a disabled family member. If that's something, if we truly are egalitarian, we should probably care about that type of equality as well. But obviously, I think there are just sort of a lot of broad other concerns I have with that. Again, I'd be curious. Again, when I look at this stuff, I'm considering what I know about economic theory. I'm considering the opinions of economists. I'm considering the empirical, evidence of this. So you just see, you can do super crude correlations between economic freedom and economic growth. I don't think those are the best type of evidence, but you can see, I think, much better causal effects when for example, you just look at a charity, one of the food distribution charities has started incorporating a price mechanism in its internally for its own food delivery, and that decreased transportation costs and administrative costs a lot, because it allowed information to flow just a lot more freely and cleanly between different food banks across the country. You look at there's studies about Japan, which instituted some property rights on some islands before World War II, and then that essentially got interrupted by World War II. So we have really good, some natural experiments here between islands that did get these reforms and islands that didn't get these reforms. And you see, sort of broadly, the effects of the price system, the effects of free markets tend to be positive overall for these things. I think it's the last two things you mentioned, people are, the main incentive of capitalism or whatever is for these people to enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else. There might be some ways in which rent seeking does happen, but I think generally, again, the types of evidence I'm considering, economic theory, the opinions of experts, the empirical evidence we have, those tend to suggest that a lot of these transactions are positive sum. Even a lot of rich people are kind of positive sum. They're providing products, they're funding innovation that a lot of people use, and they are, positive sum. There's a reason they get rich is because they're providing stuff that people want at the end of the day. And, the last thing you mentioned, things are getting worse in the 21st century. I'd also be curious to know what evidence you're looking at for that, because on my view, that's simply not true. Incomes are just generally up, even median, which accounts for like outliers like billionaires or whatever. And most other quality of life metrics are just trending upward over time. COVID might have messed some of them up, but it seems to be the case that the world is just getting better.
Oh, I mean, I wish I could sit here and say the world's getting better, but the vast wealth inequality we're seeing right now is the reason we focus on that is because the power, even if we were to accept the idea that society is better than it was at the start of the century and such, and that things are getting better, handing so much power over to a minute group of people is quite terrible. You have to look at who is in the White House right now to see an example of this, someone who has essentially bought his way into a position of significant power and is surrounded by other people who've bought their way into this power. I feel like there's a lot of things that you said which I would like to respond to, but it will be very hard to respond to it if I'm sort of listing off every single one. So if we focus on one area, I'll even let you choose, where would you like to...
We can go, I guess we can go one by one, maybe, to the things I mentioned. So it's just like, I might be a little confused as to where your claim is now. So just with regards to the welfare state and how it's being funded, like in the U.S. I know more about the U.S. than other countries, but I know some things about inequality in the UK, but I don't know about the welfare state specifically. Doesn't it seem plausible? Or I guess I have the position, as I laid out, that social spending over time has increased. I think if you just look at a percent of population receiving a lot of these benefits, that's increased as well.
But the spending doesn't translate to the family is having an experience.
Percentage GDP.
But the family that is relying on these programs is contending with rising rent prices, rising electricity bills, rising costs of food, rising costs of pretty much everything they need, because it's all held on markets. It's all something which is commodified and turned into a product that said rich people who were sort of you were praising a minute ago, to make a profit off. So they are not seeing an equal experience in society. Therefore, they're having a hard time, versus the rich person who not only is directly profiting off this hardship, off these prices rising, but never experiences food insecurity, worrying about whether they're going to pay the next bill, worrying about, say, things you can't predict. Like, let's say you crashed your car, which extreme example. There's some accident happens, some incident in your life happens, which you need to sort out here and now, like in the present day moment. If you don't have the money that a rich person does, some of these hardships are things you have to either work around, sacrifice something else for, or put up
with that. The only point I'm trying to make right now is, I simply, so from the data I've seen and some of the data I presented, it doesn't appear to me to be the case that sort of welfare spending in the U.S. has been substantially cut in any way. Again, as a percentage GDP, it's gone up, and that is as a percent of the entire economy. A lot of these benefits, I guess, not all of them have an automatic cost of living adjustment in them. I think Social Security is adjusted every year or 2 years based on CPI. I think SNAP is too, and the other data I see based on consumption poverty and supplemental poverty, which are both two measures of poverty that include the welfare benefits people receive from the government. I don't see any substantially negative effects there. In fact, I think it's clear that SNAP has decreased poverty by giving people these benefits or whatever. So I guess what evidence are you looking at that gives you the view that what I just said isn't true?
Okay. So for one, the Trump administration and several Republican administrations have suspended various programs through the bills they've passed. Very recently, actually, Trump has suspended quite a few of these programs. Secondly, I think we're still not quite seeing the issue here, right? Like, of course, the welfare program, SNAP, for instance, was good in that it alleviates problems that are being felt here and now, right? But that doesn't change that if you're someone who's on SNAP benefits, you are financially insecure and in a severely precarious situation if any one of a number of societal afflictions.
Well, I think it's just trivially true that like the people on welfare benefits are typically poor and in relatively precarious positions. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of welfare benefits is that, you know, typically we target them at people who are in these positions to try to make them less in those positions. I don't think that's in any way what I presented.
That is sort of what we're saying. It's not enough, and it's being targeted, and it shouldn't happen in the first place, right? And let's also compare
but again, it wasn't your initial claim that, you know, it simply isn't enough. I recognize you also, you know, don't believe it's enough, and I do want to get into that as well. But I'm just saying, like, simply, like, also, I don't have this as a percent of population, but, like, you know, I poke through, like, the USDA's website. If you just look at the number of households that are on SNAP, you know, that's gone up about 20 million in the last 20 years since 2000. If you look at inflation-adjusted spending,
should say something, don't you think? Don't you think that should say something if more families
I think that
the program to...
So I think part of it is just because benefits have been expanded, though, not because, you know, more people are in poverty or whatever. I think, again, if you just look at incomes, you know, those have generally grown, but even inflation-adjusted incomes for, you know, the bottom 20% or so. But I also think that, you know, that still seemingly contradicts the point that, like, there's been some insane level of austerity or whatever applied to it. If inflation-adjusted spending is going up, if the number of households in it has been going up, if relative to GDP spending has been going up, to me that doesn't seem like austerity. That just seems, you know, like a pretty normal welfare program.
It's not normal welfare, though, is it? Because at the same time as, you know, your spending's gone up, it's not gone up equivalent to the cost of food.
I'm looking at inflation-adjusted spending.
Okay, and has that accounted for the increase in costs of rent, food,
well, this is SNAP,
education?
So, well, yeah, that's included. This is looking at SNAP spending. I don't know. So I don't know if they're just when it says inflation adjusted, they're accounting for inflation. I don't know if they're looking at overall inflation or if they're looking at only food inflation. They're probably looking at overall inflation.
Give you a would you be willing to, like, send me the link of what you're looking at?
Yeah, it's just on the, like, USDA's website here. It's just a chart of I wish it had it as a percentage GDP. I could probably find it if I dug deep enough, but, you know, this is just crudely looking at spending. It's been, like, trending upward over time. It kind of fell for a bit after 2012 or whatever. Adjusted for inflation to $2024 using the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, U.S. Department of Commerce Bureau. Okay, so they're looking at overall inflation. They're looking at PCE, which includes healthcare, includes education, includes rent, includes food prices in it. So yeah, it's inflation adjusted. It's accounting for that.
Okay, and so this still doesn't quite address the, you know, wider cost of living costs, though, right? Because that still doesn't reflect the fact that we're also cutting the school budgets, the healthcare costs going up and such, the transport programs that have been suspended. The
I don't believe the government expenditure. I don't believe the government expenditures on food or on education or healthcare have gone down, even in inflation adjusted terms. I just thought that just
they don't do enough to support the population they have. Right? They don't have the school is unable to do as much, to support the need they have,
the case
because
that
they aren't given the things they need.
I'm certain some schools are underfunded, but if you just look at, like, federal government spending on education, that has certainly been trending upward as a percentage of GDP over time. If you look at state level funding, it might differ based on state, but I would imagine it's stable to upward trending over time for almost every U.S. state.
Say that last bit again. Sorry.
I don't know exactly by state how it breaks down, but with education funding specifically, I know for the federal government, based on graphs I've seen previously, I could probably find it, spending on that has been trending upward. For states specifically, it could be the case that some states have relatively stable spending on education as a percentage of GDP.
Spending equivalent to what the need is, though? Is it spending that's equivalent to what the need is?
Again, your claim, so you obviously take a quite radical position on, how much welfare we need.
I'd say I do, yeah.
Yeah, so... To me, obviously, it's clear to me you're going to view, the amount the U.S. spends on welfare as inadequate. But it was also, your claim earlier was that these programs are subject to a lot of austerity, and
which they were.
I just don't see that to be the case in any of the data that I'm looking at. It looks like spending as a percentage of GDP has gone up in all these areas. Even inflation-adjusted spending has gone up. The number of households affected by it has gone up. Supplemental poverty and consumption poverty have both gone down as more people have received these benefits. So,
I ask how they're measuring poverty, by the way, as well, because we're not just talking about the poverty itself. There's also the people sort of on the margin, which are affected by these programs. There's people who use these programs who aren't necessarily malnutritioned and sort of in danger of death, but are in the vicinity of the problems that are faced by
I think
society.
So my understanding, supplemental poverty is just assigning a sort of amount of income that you need to be above the poverty line, and they're including your market income and non-market income in your sort of in your total amount of income you get. And if you exceed the income threshold, at that point you're considered out of poverty. So that importantly, a lot of people at times like cite if anyone tells you welfare isn't working because the official poverty metric shows that the number of people in poverty hasn't fallen. The official poverty metric doesn't include like government benefits and like non-cash transfers in its measure. But I believe the supplemental poverty measure just says if you earn more than like X amount that we assign to be the poverty threshold based on what we, believe people need with regards to the cost of certain things. Like that's where they define poverty. And then consumption poverty is kind of just looking at like a fixed basket, like it's looking at like an absolute standard of living, like sort of absolutely what are people able to buy with the money they have, how much of a basket of goods are they able to buy. That it's a more absolute standard because the supplemental poverty rate that income will kind of change over time, and it's just looking at income, not your actual consumption. And I don't know where the exact threshold for that is, but I'm trying to find.
Okay.
Because the supplemental poverty measure says based on recent expenditures of food, clothing, shelter, utilities, telephone, and internet, and I think they assign an income at which they believe that you can buy enough of that stuff to not be considered in poverty.
Yeah, so it's something which obviously has different people measure it different ways, right? And so whilst obviously we can sort of generally point to what we're saying, we are still declaring something which is only just above, say, the hardship we described a second ago as fine, as something.
But I don't think that's at all a problem from my position. Again, I think if it was the case that like families were being sort of negatively affected by this type of austerity or whatever, you would see some effect on consumption poverty because families would just be able to buy less stuff. You would see some effect on supplemental poverty because people would just have less income. And you would see spending to like inflation adjusted spending either, go down or like spending relative to GDP go down. And like none of those things I think you've seen. And a lot of times, I feel like I bring up this point and like I'm asking, I don't think I've ever gotten an answer to sort of like what data you're looking at for these conclusions. And it also like a lot of times it feels like
I can dig out some, it's not as though I've not read papers on these and not read, sources and such that point to the fact there have been a negative harm done to the actual programs that people use and such. We can see that in, as I've said, the defunding of schools, the suspension of transport programs, the fact that the cost of these things has increased. The cost of being in society has increased. And for as much as you said about earlier about inflation adjusted spending and such, that does not necessarily account for all the ways in which these things impact on people, especially when it's, data produced by, say, someone who has a different interpretation of poverty to someone else, someone who's not necessarily accounted for the fact that there are things which maybe from one lens seen,
I mean,
if they're frivolous, but from another are quite important. But I'll try and dig out.
I guess I'm looking at a number of like typically official metrics. I don't think the consumption poverty has any official like U.S. government endorsed version of it. But it's still I think that's measured by paper by some economists who like do good work regardless. But like I'm considering like I have preferred measures of inflation. I think PCE is generally preferable to CPI. I think CPI has some reasons that it overestimates inflation, including especially historically before like there were some commissions in the like the Boston Commission I think in 1995, which made some changes to how it measures stuff, which I think were before that it CPI quite overestimated inflation. But like I'm considering what these different measures encounter or like measure, and to me I don't know, it doesn't seem like a lot of times you're doing that. It seems like we're just writing off a lot of this stuff based on, well, it may not get the full picture in this case or whatever, and I'm gonna regardless of what the spending as a percent of GDP is, maybe on the ground families just don't feel that or whatever. I'm not actually seeing anything. It's hard for me to ever sort of change my opinion, I guess, when I have a view that I've come to based on the data I've seen, based on the opinions of economists, based on the empirical evidence and stuff. And the response I get to that is simply is basically like, well, have you considered that sometimes poverty doesn't include every conceivable thing that we want to include?
And it's also sustained as well, right? Like just because you receive the program and aren't officially in poverty, which again we'll critique and such, that doesn't deny the fact that there is an injustice there. There is a different experience of life, and that is what we're trying to also address, right? Like there is something fundamentally wrong with a society that has people needing these programs, which is one of the reasons that it's been criticized in the first place, the inequality, the injustice. And I am trying to find one of the papers that would be more suitable, because I do have a few. Okay. Whether they are quite...
I mean, that would just go back to...
in my document folder.
Whether equality is intrinsically important, but...
The fact that austerity is also an official policy of many of these governments we're talking about. Well, it's not even as though it's something that people have pointed out. Is something which they actively said they were going to do. Cut these programs, suspend the actual access that someone's getting, say, from the state, and say, well, you need to either rely on these corporations or do something else.
A lot of those programs are much more narrow than you kind of view them, and also my criticism of them, to the extent that that I have them, and I do definitely have some, are going to be much more narrow. So like there were lack of deficit spending in a liquidity trap, post 2008, like I think was a mistake that some European countries made, because I think it's plausible that they could have stimulated their economy more and avoided the sort of deeper double dip recession that a lot of them had in 2008 and then like 2012 if they had done more deficit spending during that time. But I don't think sort of first of all, I don't think the U.S. did that nearly to the same extent. Like the U.S. is never, I don't think, had the sort of type of austerity that a lot of European countries have had, or a lot of third world countries have had.
Sense that I agree in that in a sense, because obviously the European nations had more social programs to begin with to cut and to suspend. So on that side, I do, on that side of things, I do agree. But the principle is still in place. Like the programs which are there for Americans have been reduced since Reagan in the 80s and such. And so the effects.
Well, I just don't think the data supports that.
Sorry?
I just don't think the data supports that. Like austerity, I think is much more sort of narrow than that view. Like I don't view austerity as simply like cutting welfare programs necessarily, and I don't even think.
Well, that's one of the main parts of it, right? And it's also increasing
but I think
the involvement of the market and such in different things.
So when I think of austerity, I think of more than like simply sort of cutting welfare programs because we believe something about welfare being maybe unjust, on some libertarian beliefs or whatever, or like we think it's like some substantial drag to economic growth. Like I think it's typically interpreted, at least in my understanding, to be more narrow than that. Typically it's we're kind of talking about a broader consolidation of the government's budget or whatever. And I do think some European countries sort of made that mistake in doing that after 2008. But with the U.S., for example, SNAP benefits have like gone down since COVID. The child tax credit has expired since COVID. The ACA subsidies in all likeliness will not be extended past the COVID temporary stuff. I guess like when you consider that those provisions expire, like is that austerity to you?
Again, sorry, the paper I was trying to find is behind a paywall, so I'm trying to find a way around that. But
sure.
Say what you said again. So I was
okay. So like when, for example, there were sunset provisions for like temporary aid. Like in the U.S., we're seeing this right now because there's been a government shutdown, fight over it, extending ACA subsidies past the sunset provision. There's been similar things as other welfare programs with regards to, having some SNAP benefits go down and some other child tax credit stuff go down post COVID. Like when those benefits expire, do you consider that austerity or?
When a program suspends, to an extent, yes, because obviously it is them not spending money on something that was previously. But there's also coupled with austerity is also being criticised. Privatization, deregulation, things which have an adverse effect on the ground experience. But to come back to your question, sorry, because obviously we're trying to think about austerity for a minute and such. The suspension and cutting of programs. This is something which does take numerous forms. It's not just actively someone strikes a line for a program and says, no, we're going to just stop this program entirely. It's also affecting what people who are in charge of those administrations or are administering the role that is being done are able to do. So, for instance, let's say you are a social worker. If your resources aren't able to go as far, you can't support. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was talking to my chat. No worries. Don't. If I'm ever muted, I'm probably talking to my chat. Don't worry about it.
Right. Okay. What's that? Yeah. So, if you're a social worker, say, okay, and you're trying to support people in your district, and your resources aren't going as far, and because other programs are less able to perform the roles they're meant to do, there's more need increasing. Said social worker has a greater pressure to be able to perform their job, and that leads to problems for them in delivering their role. And so these nodes, social worker, healthcare professional, emergency responder, educator, these nodes across the system of society, the network of society, as they are less able to do their job bit by bit, because it's not as though it's like a whole thing is cut straight away. It's bit by bit in a lot of cases. This worsens the impact of these cuts as a whole, and it gets worse and worse over time, and people face more hardship. And it changes from administration to administration because, typically the Democrats do more for their welfare state. They do more to...
It's substantially responsive to most of my points. So what belief have I presented that you think would be sort of changed by you saying, well, sort of austerity can happen slowly, and administrations differ by how much they support civil service workers or administrators in regards to welfare benefits.
Okay, you've produced these statistics, which you have then you put these statistics out, which say, well, this demonstrates that austerity hasn't really happened, but austerity has happened, because if we look at what the impact of healthcare, education, transport and such, we see programs less able to help people, healthcare professionals, professionals in
wouldn't you expect to see that
industries.
In the data somewhere? Wouldn't you, if it was helping people less, wouldn't you expect to see the number of households on it fall, or inflation adjusted spending fall, or percent of GDP spent on it fall, or consumption poverty increase, or supplemental poverty increase?
Well, there have been increases in some of those things. I mean, in food insecurity and such, wealth inequality. the number of people
I'm not actually
who are unable to access the things in society, the schools which struggle to support all the need they have, neurodivergent children, for instance, who have their either aren't recognized because there's no program in place for them, or don't receive the help for as long as they need it because the school is unable to sustain their spending and such. It is really annoying me that I do not have clearly the licensing is applied in a few of these
I guess
papers I've read previously.
I've got it. So you don't really see. I think it. Since the COVID expanded benefits expired, I don't think they've released a new consumption poverty estimate yet. But I think you have seen some increase in supplemental poverty and the official poverty measure. But that's because the benefits that were helping people are just no longer being provided to people. That's not because the benefits themselves are not actually helping people when they get to them, right? It's just because we've reduced eligibility. The other things you mentioned, it's just not. It's not even clear to me. And I think it was the last point you mentioned on the 4 points that I wanted to go down there that we were going to go one by one by. It's also just not clear to me that these other metrics have been getting particularly worse. So, schooling, I think funding for schools has been going up, and I think
there's more people.
But even per capita, per student spending or spending as a percentage of GDP has also been going up, to my understanding.
Does that account for all the need that is there, though? Does that account for all the stuff that goes into the social reality of the school, the cost, the increase in the cost of running the school, bills, transport?
It feels like if it was the case that the data I'm citing supported your argument, right? It feels like if the sort of spending per student, was decreasing, you would be pretty quick to use that as evidence of austerity, right? It seems like only because it doesn't necessarily support that argument, we're kind of suddenly saying, well, actually, I don't necessarily think it's a good measurement because, it doesn't include every conceivable possible thing that could go into it. I guess technically no, but literally no measure does, and I think it's probably one of the better indicators that we could use. And to the extent school performance is down, that's probably most likely due to COVID, obviously. But
but austerity has been felt in schools. You type this in on Google, you find some, but I'm trying to find a paper which I've read specifically.
If you tell me the name of the paper, I can probably find it.
So one of them, which I had in my sort of documents, a flashy title, but Austerity and the Poison of Neoliberal Miseducation. Clearly, this author has a slightly dramatic way of writing. We put it in the YouTube chat for you. Don't know why it's in capitals either. Another one would be this one here. This one, hopefully, it's over the word limit. Hold on.
Okay.
I don't know if all of these will let you see it, because sadly I couldn't actually access the top one because of
okay, just real quick, what's the causal inference in this study, or is there what are they measuring something? Is there any causal inference in it? I don't see any math in this when I was just skimming through this.
Can you access the paper?
Yeah, I'm on a PDF of it right now.
So could you send me the PDF link, please?
Yeah.
I was hit by a paywall when I tried to use it.
Yeah, okay. So, this is not... Hold on. What do you think this thing is doing? What do you think this is measuring? What...
There we go. So yeah, this analyzes the effect of austerity on
using what causal inference method? What data are they looking at, and what are they using some instrumental variable approach? Do they do some regressions, or what are we doing here?
Looking at the actual impact of the thing, not sort of an abstracted statistic which doesn't necessarily portray the on the ground effects.
Okay.
But if you read the paper slowly through, there are plenty of references to the statistical element of
yeah, I'm sure.
of
okay.
this. This is not it, but it is there. I'm trying to find one that would have more.
So the reason, okay, so
outfit if you to see that, but
like to the
as you
extent
can
that
imagine, it's not quite as,
I doubt it or whatever, right? This is a paper that is not published in an economics journal, right? This is written by a guy who I'm presuming is not an economist. If I look him up, it says American Canadian cultural critic. So I'm not really convinced this dude knows enough about economics to prevent, make any substantial contribution to the effects of austerity, right? Secondly, like, I'm just this is literally like the opening of it. Like, right-wing calls for austerity suggests more than the market-driven desire to punish the poor, working class, and middle class by distributing wealth to the 1%. Yeah. It also points to a politics of disposability in which social provisions, public spheres, and institutions that nourish democratic values and social relations are being dismantled, including public and higher education. So, like, obviously, like, this is not, I can tell just from the opening thing here, there's not like there's not a study that is trying to measure any substantive effects from austerity. This is a commentary on what this writer thinks is neoliberalism. Following the statistical analysis and thoughts that have been included. Just to be clear, this guy is doing no causal inference of his own, right?
No, he's looking at, he's analyzing it following the statisticians' accounts and such.
Okay. Do you know anything he cites in here?
Sorry?
Do you have any of the stuff that he cites in here? Like, what are the causal things that he cites in here that are making me believe austerity is bad, or would even would change my views on anything I presented so far?
Oh, they're all there for you to have a look at. I mean, I can't say I've followed the ones he provided.
Yeah. Okay.
Clearly, from the other things which are in society, some of which I've put in the chat for you to have a look at if you'd like. That's there. It's not as though I'm just like pulling this out of nowhere. Austerity is something which has been observed
this is like
in society.
This feels like a relatively out of nowhere thing. Like Project Muse. This is a journal I published by the University of Nebraska Press. Like, what even? This is not a journal that anyone takes particularly seriously, and it's just like this feels like it could be in a like.
You could equally say this about some of the economic stuff that you've suggested.
Absolutely not. No, because they actually employ a lot of causal inference mechanisms. They are written by economists who
their analysis has not matched the actual lived reality people are in right now. Like,
that's not the criticism I'm making of this. First of all, if it comes down to like, I don't know what you're looking at for the lived reality, what people are in, right? Like if I am looking at data that says, Snap has like X effect or whatever, I'm trusting that data over like any sort of vibe-based argument you can give me about what people are feeling on the ground. I just don't know. I just don't even know how to interpret that stuff. But like, it's not even like the criticism I'm making of this is not. It's not in line with the reality that we're seeing or whatever. I do think probably there are factual claims that are just like inaccurate. Like, I do think the claim that austerity wants to punish the poor, working class, and middle class, like that's the actual goal of it. I don't even think that's true.
Of course it is.
Like neoliberalism embodies an ideology that produces both zones of abandonment and forms of social and civil death. Like that seems a little crazy, but regardless,
non-fun. If you cut a program or suspend or weaken a program designed to help people in the lower brackets of society, then of course you're punishing them.
But that's a fact. But that's a fact. You recognize the people who believe in austerity, and I certainly don't believe in austerity as you would put it. I don't think I believe in austerity in many cases in the kind of more narrow view of what austerity is. The goal of it is not like explicitly to punish the poor and working class and to distribute wealth to the 1% or to destroy democratic values and this or whatever.
Firstly, these are the consequences of it, and secondly, I would say that yes, there is an element of. Sorry,
but that's a claim that relies on factual stuff that they would dispute, right?
Who would dispute?
People who support austerity. They would say it leads to good outcomes, at least in the longer run.
If you're at the sort of the reason that that like wealthier institutes and corporations and such overly favor these policies because they know money is funneled up to them. The wealth inequality that exists,
I'm sure,
benefits. Well, they do though.
conceivably that's a thing that can happen sometime. Now, I will say it is far more likely to me that this, to be
every time. when has austerity and neoliberalism and stuff not led to vast wealth inequalities?
Well, I don't even, and we can talk about wealth inequality too. I don't even agree that wealth inequality has substantially gone up in the U.S. in the last 50 or so ish years. But regardless, I think, to the extent that I have a concern about a journal being funded by billionaires and putting out misleading information, I have way more of a concern of that. The website is Project Muse, the journal is Simploke. I don't even know what I've never heard of this before at all.
Didn't say your economics journal was produced by a billionaire. I said that the policy of austerity is stuff that people. Sorry?
You said the reason they put out that stuff is because they know, it's going to funnel money to
neoliberal policies.
Right, but you understand, the stuff that good quality economics journals put out are stuff that's actually causal inference, right? It's economists looking at data and employing some mechanism to determine the causal effects of something.
From the actual social world. Just looking at numbers doesn't give you a proper portrait of the society. And I would say that the numbers do suggest there is a bit of a problem, because there's still significant food insecurity. There's still people.
Oh my God! I mean, first of all, there are plenty of numbers you can find out there. There are plenty of empirical evidence you can find out there that don't support austerity, right, or that don't support cutting welfare programs. There are plenty of empirical studies that support.
What do you mean don't support?
I mean, you can go Google Paul Krugman 1990 something liquidity trap, in Japan, and Krugman has a whole famous paper about liquidity traps and the need for deficit spending under a liquidity trap, right? Or you can look. There's plenty of other studies since then. I'm sure. I got some post Keynesian resources I can send you of people who would go even further than Krugman and say, maybe we need to deficit spend in non-liquidity trap situations as well, because the market has some fundamental uncertainty that's going to fail to deliver full employment in most cases. And there are causal things you can find for that. And I don't think it's fair to say that it doesn't. It feels like pretty inherently vague to me. Number one, to say this is a statistical abstraction of the underlying society or whatever. I mean, I care about when I'm doing a policy or whatever. I care about oh my God, Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism. We just cited a whole ass book at me by Mark Fisher, bro. Nice one. But it just feels crazy to me to discount the work of the causal estimates here by saying it's simply some abstraction. No, I think it's the best type of soft science, social science that you can do in these cases where all we have is natural experiments. Well,
no, I think that when we're saying abstraction, these economists who are saying that someone who says, oh, well, there's no austerity, is ignoring what government policy has been for some time, what the narrative, what the consequence for welfare programs has been.
I just want to know. Okay, we have two. Okay, we have me, making a claim that substantially welfare in the U.S. has not experienced any type of major austerity. We have you making a claim that it has. How do we go about deciding who is right about this claim? What types of evidence should we consider? Should we consider the opinion of experts? Should we consider the percent of spending on this stuff, the inflation adjusted spending? Should we consider surveys and stuff? What type of stuff are we considering?
All of those things should be taken into account.
Okay.
And then we should look at what is happening right now in the social world, which things like, in Trump's many of his most recent bills, he's actively suspended programs that existed for people. We should look at the fact that since the 80s, there's been an active effort from Republican policy and Democrats to an extent as well to think critically about the way people have
I just want to know, so of the evidence that we should be considering, what supports the view that, so far at least, welfare programs have actually, experienced some type of substantial austerity. I agree that Trump is bad and Trump wants to, with the big beautiful bill, to some extent cut Medicaid. And
give me a moment. Let me quickly.
Because again, I don't think you see it in the supplemental poverty measure. I don't think you see it in the consumption poverty measure. I don't think you see it in just spending as a percentage of GDP. I don't think you see it in the number of households on it. I don't think you see it in inflation adjusted spending. And it seems crazy to me that.
By the way, can I ask why it was an issue that I cited a book, by the way?
I don't know the exact reason you decided the book at me, because it was, you were, I think I was speaking at the time. I don't know what the exact claim you're trying to cite with that book was.
Yeah, well, you asked for, obviously we're talking and I'm trying to dig through my notes and whatever to try and find sources.
I was telling you, like, I don't know the exact reason you cited that one book, but
well, it covers many of the elements of neoliberal austerity and such that have been criticised. Yeah, and some of the reasons why.
I'm familiar. I haven't read the book, but I'm familiar broadly. I'm familiar broadly with Mark Fisher, and I'm familiar, with the book. I don't know what everything you talked about in there is, but like, again, the thing I'm questioning here, right? Like, it feels like I'm presenting a view, and like I have the evidence I consider for this view, and the stuff I get in response feels like either some post hoc consideration of, well, actually, does student spending per capita, does that actually measure every single possible thing that we could ever possibly include? And then we get, well, it's the inflation adjusted spending even adjusted for the rising cost of healthcare, when I literally said inflation adjusted? Or have you considered reading an entire Mark Fisher book where he criticizes neoliberalism?
Well, I asked you what the adjusting was. What is the inflation adjusting they've done?
They're adjusting. I told you. I initially I had to read the subheading. It says inflation adjusted. I didn't know what measure of inflation that they were saying, and I then clarified to you after reading the subheading. It was PCE, personal consumption expenditures, that they're adjusting for.
Okay, and how is that? How are they taking that into account? May I ask? Whilst I dig through, I need to organize these notes. My goodness.
Wait, just to be clear, are you asking me how they are using PCE to adjust for inflation?
I'm asking you how have they basically go for it.
Okay, so they take the amount of money Snap spends and they divide it by PCE. Like, you can literally like recreate this in Fred if you want. Do you know what Fred is?
Sorry, I zoned that way.
Do you know what Fred? Do you know what Fred is?
Fred, enlighten me. Go on.
Okay, Fred is just a data site that the Federal Reserve of Kansas, I think, keeps up. Where they have
Fred or Fed. Sorry,
Fred. The website is called Fred. I think it stands for Federal Reserve. Something.
Uncle Tex is he's not a very nice guy, is he? He's in slurs like that. That's a scummy thing to do, isn't it?
True. Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. They maintain Fred. Doesn't Fred stand for? What does Fred stand for? I don't actually remember. But it's just a site that Federal Reserve keeps. Federal Reserve Economic Data. Okay, that's what it stands for.
Okay, right.
As the name applies.
So ignore his
Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis keeps up this site where they release a bunch of data. Actually, they're not necessarily the ones that release it, but they take data that the BAA and BLS releases and some other places release and put it all in nice fancy graphs. And you can even do this yourself if you want to. If there is I don't know for certain if there's a series on Fred about Snap spending specifically. For any thing you want to look at, if you want to look at average hourly wages, you can go into Fred and like type in average hourly wages, and then you can type in. You can hit like edit graph, and then you hit add line, and then what you do is you type in consumer price index or personal consumption expenditures or whatever measure of inflation you want to use, and then all you have to do is simply divide it. You just type A over B. In this case, that's all they're doing when they're including when they're adjusting for inflation. They're taking PCE and they're dividing Snap spending by PCE.
Okay, does that account for the fact that what you could, with the money and resources you had in, say, 1970 or whenever, 1975 or whenever, it's different to now?
Yes, they make. Wait, okay. Two things. One, I'll just briefly clarify what you mean by different. Do you mean people are buying like different things, or like the quality of them is different, or like what is the criticism there?
All of those things, yeah. All of those things, exactly.
Both things.
All of those things.
Yes. Okay. So yes, it does. They change the basket of goods over time. In fact, PCE changes the basket of goods very frequently because it measures what people are actually buying. And two, they do hedonic adjustments. They try to account for changes in quality. They account for the fact that computers have gotten better over time, that TVs have gotten better over time, right? And, they can just do more things now. They have more RAM or whatever. They do these types of adjustments. It's done by very smart economists who account for all these things. Secondly, I'm just like, it's difficult to me to see how you feel so confident talking about these things when you seem to not know what PCE is, you don't know what FRED is, you don't know what inflation adjusted even really appears to mean, because you don't know what PCE is and you don't know how to do that. You haven't presented any stats that are actually contrary to the ones I've submitted.
Hold on a minute, non-fun. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Whether or not I've heard or have familiarity with the stats that you'd provide and such, and the terms you'd use, doesn't make me unable to speak about the social reality and such, and the fact that there are clearly evidence of these things happening, which I've provided in the chat, by the way.
But these are stats you should understand if you're making such strong claims. These are like if you're claiming that Snap has experienced some type of incredible austerity or whatever, and I present you the fact that inflation adjusted spending has not gone down for Snap. It's been like generally upward trending. It kind of spikes after recessions and it'll trend down for a bit.
In of itself isn't something we're accepting straight away. By the way, I don't necessarily think that is something that is what we're trying to hone in on. I don't believe that the way they've come to the conclusion of something like inflation adjusted spending is actually.
But you don't even know what they're doing. You don't even know what inflation is. You don't even know
I know what inflation. I always.
You don't know how inflation is actually measured. Actually, wait. Can you define inflation?
Sorry.
Can you actually? It's real quick. Can you define inflation?
When the things, cost of things goes up, in relation to what it was previously. But different.
Not horrible necessarily.
Go on, you define it.
I'll take it.
No, go on.
Well, a general rise in a price level typically caused by an excess in money or a growth in money supply in excess of trade needs, I think is the sort of standard definition that most of the Federal Reserve banks use.
Fairly analogous to what I said, but
yeah, I don't think what you gave was a horrible definition. But I think you don't know how inflation is measured. So it seems totally again post hoc to say it feels like you didn't really have any knowledge of PCE before this conversation or whatever.
That's not. No, I wouldn't say that's the case.
Well okay. I'd say so you didn't have a particularly strong knowledge of PCE before this. I think if you saw a graph, it appears to be if you saw a graph that inflation adjusted spending at Snap was going down. The argument would not be, well, I don't think PCE encompasses everything that could possibly go into this consideration. Therefore, I don't think this is good evidence. It feels to me that you would happily accept that as evidence for your side. And it's only because it doesn't align with what you've said in this debate that you're going against that.
Again, sorry.
So it seeming like it doesn't appear that you had a particularly great knowledge of what PCE is or how inflation is measured and how we do inflation adjustments before we started talking here.
Well, lack of familiarity with a few terms doesn't dispute the broader sort of ideas of. But
this is by criticism. Like I honestly the big issue is again I don't know how you are. I don't know how you are arriving at these conclusions other than vibes. It seems like if you just saw a graph that inflation adjusted spending was going down, you would happily take that as evidence for your side. And because it's not going down, you seem to now go to, well, maybe inflation doesn't account for everything, even though I don't know how they even measure it.
They're all things that you've assumed non-fun. I've put plenty of things.
I'm just saying based on. No. So like based on what you're doing here, I don't see why this wouldn't be the case.
Sorry?
I'm saying based on how it seems like you're arriving at these conclusions, to me it does not seem like it is the case that you're making some kind of more honest Drew attempt to understand a lot of these things. It feels like a lot of times you are, I don't want to say confirmation bias, but you would happily take things that you do it your post hoc coming with objections that I don't think you actually hold.
I don't doubt these stats have some elements of truth to them. I've never said they're lies or whatever. I'm saying there's a broader profile which we should be considering, which aren't necessarily captured by just a number, a statistic.
The only thing you've given me for that is vibes.
Sorry, you're speaking over me when I'm trying to explain what I'm saying.
Okay.
When we're trying to think about something like the social world, the actual lived experience of people, obviously statistics are important, and they are something quantitative like a number is definitely important. I'm not saying that the welfare programs you said on still having money spent in them. But something like austerity isn't something you can just say, oh, well, this line goes up, therefore it's not happening, as you've implied of these things. The fact that, say, I wasn't completely familiar with some of the terminology used doesn't, I think, discount the things I've said, or the papers I've cited as well, which I don't think can be just dismissed as, oh, well, I don't like this. Even now,
it's clearly my criticism of the paper you cited is not, I don't like this. It's that it doesn't employ any causal inference methods. It's not a good journal, and it doesn't provide any substantial criticism of the stuff I've said.
But it does. You haven't. The things you've cited don't capture the actual elements of the social. The social.
What evidence is presented in his stuff that my view doesn't take into account?
Qualitative and quantitative analysis of the social fabric of society. The fact that people's lives have materially got worse.
I don't even accept that. Like we can talk about that too, but like that even if that was the case, I don't actually think that would present like a serious criticism of my view that like it's just not the case that SNAP has gotten substantially worse, or the case that social welfare spending in general has just been substantially lessened.
It's not that SNAP has got worse, it's that societal conditions have made it harder to just rely on SNAP.
Well,
rely on the program for welfare.
Your earlier
claim,
does
that make sense? Like it's not,
was that these programs have been subject again to like a lot of austerity, and
which they have.
So I don't think that's true, and I have not seen any good evidence that they have
so
been.
The things you can get on food stamps, for instance, have reduced since whenever year. The way
what's the evidence for that?
Sorry,
what's the evidence for that?
What you can get? Do we find the reductions?
I don't believe so. Like it could maybe be the case that like maybe the average amount of money someone gets on food stamps has gone down because we've expanded it to so many people, but I don't even believe that's true.
There's tons of you just Google this stuff, to be honest. But
yeah, I'm
sure. Okay, well, I can put these in the chat if you don't believe me.
I mean, I think I've like if you're doing it, just Google it right now. I just don't think.
Obviously, it's not just Googling it right now. Obviously, there's more papers which I've read. Yep. As we came across earlier, that you can say yep if you like, but paywalls are a thing. I don't have access to all the stuff I previously did, which is another part of neoliberal issues, right?
Bro.
Education being paywall. Sorry?
True. We would have no paywalls if it wasn't for neoliberalism. This is true. Unbelievable.
Yes, because education is a social good and it's tiered off by paywalls because of people trying to make a profit from education. That's of course one of the issues.
First of all,
one of the things that goes on.
It's not like, unless I'm going crazy, I believe public universities also have paywalls for stuff. And I believe...
and that's also been criticized. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, but that's obviously not neoliberalism causing the paywall in that case. That's just the fact that universities, have to compensate people for doing research for that to be the case, right? Like that's...
The organization of it through, the market and such inevitably prices many people out of it. That's what we're saying. That's why the inequality should be addressed. The fact that only certain people can actually reach the educational institutions you need to be able to then access larger parts of society, to have the knowledge to better oneself. That is what we're sort of saying. Don't you think it's sad that say someone wants to read more about something and they're just hit with no, you must pay £40 or whatever to get this paper, get our monthly subscription.
That's not how I base my beliefs off of, right? Like
no, but I'm asking you, do you think it's sad that someone can't access something someone else can because of an arbitrary?
No, I would not hold that generally. That's sad. That does not feel sad to me. That's not generally like
to read. But it's true, isn't it? If I want to learn more, I have to pay. Do you think that's a bit?
First of all, that's not even. you have to pay a lot less to learn today than you did historically. Like if your goal is like truly just learning, there were so many free courses on YouTube. There were so many free open source courses or whatever. I've been reading through some of them.
Is that quite the same as what I'm saying, mate? Ignore the free studies for a second. If I want to,
but I'm just saying materially, there have been plenty of opportunities to learn that have gotten better, partially because of neoliberalism or whatever. Plenty of open source textbooks, open source courses or whatever that you can apply to or whatever, and almost everyone has access to a computer now where they can do things like that if they truly want to. They truly care about learning. But second of all, I also think that like in order to have more academic work be done, it's probably important to compensate people for doing that work, and having certain research be paywalled is how we do that. Now I think like there's probably some cases out there where it's like if you have public funding for a paper, maybe you shouldn't have it be paywalled, or maybe there should be some limit on how long you can have it paywalled. But I obviously view that type of compensation as important in order to incentivize people to do research. And I don't think I don't really base my views on sort of like what feels sad to me necessarily. I'm kind of like I'm basing my views on what incentive structures kind of lead to the best outcome, and I'm considering the empirical evidence we have. I'm considering the opinions of economists. I'm considering the economic theory that we have.
Okay, right. Obviously, it's not just it's sad. It's a fundamental inequality, because if only people with the economic resources to be able to access a paper can read said paper, it makes the knowledge that is there only accessible to certain people. It reproduces the inequalities of the world. It means,
but that's just how old
most people. Oh, sorry.
That's just how old prices work, right? It's that they price out people who can afford them. That's it. But that's the
fundamental problem is capitalism, isn't it? The problem is that there's a wider attitudes to things in society as priced on the market and such.
Technically, I think you can have a price system without a capitalist system. Like you could have worker co-ops, and I think that's fair to consider socialist.
That's not what I'm saying. The fact that resources are privately controlled, and the fact that there exist people who have billions whilst others have nothing, produces a landscape in which many people cannot access education and the knowledge we have in society. And you said a second ago, things like you said, almost everyone has a computer, but almost isn't everyone. Therefore, it's not good. Secondly, why is that wow?
That's not a substantive. I recognize not everyone has a computer, but I think a lot more people have a computer because we have a capitalist system than we have a computer under some type of socialistic system. Because it seems like the point I always bring it up, which is there are always going to be trade-offs to these things. I agree that to some extent the price system is going to create inequality. Now, I also think you could technically have a social system that still maintains a lot of prices. Like you could have worker co-ops, and worker co-ops would still trade with each other based on a price and market mechanism, and that would still be considered like a social system overall if you had everything be worker co-ops. But regardless, I think there are reasons to believe why the price system is very good at transmitting information very quickly. There are reasons to believe the price system is very good at sort of incentivizing people to be productive, at incentivizing businesses to use resources efficiently so they don't, produce products that nobody wants, or so they don't waste, a bunch of resources that have better alternatives going to someone else. Obviously, I think prices do a pretty good job at this, and that's why we see, I'm waiting sort of the theory we have. I read economics textbooks where they present his view. I've read Hayek where he presents a strong theoretical case for this stuff. I'm considering the empirical evidence that we have that says something like this is true. Like the thing I can pull up the exact study, but the thing I mentioned earlier, one of the largest food banks in the US, sort of had a centrally planned system for distributing food across its various local food banks, where food banks would sort of request food and it'd have to be processed by a central authority to get the food there. And they ended up they switched over to some internal price mechanism that just let local food banks sort of bid on available food, and that ended up having much more efficient results. Someone, a post Keynesian in my chat, is yelling at me for that paper. Maybe it's a bad paper, I don't know, but I think broadly there are other cases, Charsky, that this appears to be true. And I agree in some cases that's going to create some inequality. I don't think that inequality is intrinsically bad, and it seems like there be trade-offs between the incentives and information that would exist in a price system that we have.
Okay, but why the trade-offs in this system right now aren't good ones? They're not fair ones. They're terrible. The idea that
I don't agree that they're terrible.
Well, if you're in the Congo right now to produce the computers we have in society, you're currently barrel of a gun. Well, I mean, you put it in your face, but it's true, right? Like the things we have in our society at the moment. Sorry? For one, you keep cutting in halfway through a clause I'm saying, so it's hard for you to know what quite I'm saying. The barrel of a gun at which workers are made to work under in this system right now produce the things that we're using in society, and we don't have a choice about that because the market is dominated by people who financially incentivized to do this. And you're chuckling, but it's objectively true, right? Like people in the Congo right now, or in say like a Foxconn factory in Southeast Asia somewhere, these are people who are essentially slaves, right? Like people who have no other choice but than to be in these places at risk of death to produce the things we have in society so that people at the top could profit. There's no, I don't think that we can say, oh, well, it's just, we have to have trade-offs when there's such horrendous injustice in society that we're in this position. And then throughout history, we've got to look as well, the role of slavery in building capitalism, the role of the abuse of people, of workers and such. We spoke about earlier about how the welfare state was created. This came through worker movements and through mass organizations against capital. It was detested by capitalists initially because it was a threat to their wealth and such. And so to some extent, when we get to the sort of the neoliberal austerity turn and such that we've seen, that in some ways is a reaction to all of the of recapturing capital they lost, almost, in a sense, right? It's trying to assert their position at the top of capitalist society. And so when we're trying to think about the capitalist world in terms of inequality and in terms of the problems we face and such, we're trying to address all of these things in one. We're trying to say, well, instead of having to have trade-offs, and instead of having to, well, certainly the magnitude of trade-offs we have today, we're trying to think about making a better world, trying to say, okay, well, no one should have to have these basic human rights denied to them on the basis of nothing. And I think that is why we can't just sort of leave it where we are now and say, well, yeah, we can hopefully go towards a steady growth and such. Like, it has to be better.
Okay, I don't. There are like so many things that it feels impossible that any type of like evidence would actually convince you of that stuff. For one, I made a pretty narrow claim about the price system involved, right? And there are probably trade-offs between sort of a more equal world and a world of sort of more total utility, where there are incentives for people to respond to market incentives and stuff, and like that just leads to more innovation, that leads to better outcomes, that leads to more efficient resource allocation. I think like you can see stuff state-owned industries in certain countries performing worse than equivalent private industries, right?
Well, is that really, like, if you're a capitalist trying to privatize more, I wouldn't necessarily say a direct comparison between those two things is necessarily going to prove privatization is better or prove that capitalistic models. And I would also say that the state institutions are also on markets and also share elements of capitalistic policies and such. I think that we're also not quite what I'm advocating. It's also, like, for me, the state being in charge of some institution isn't really what I'm saying is the solution. I'm trying to think about things in terms of the wider network of capitalism. The social factors which produce people having to get on a mine to produce our computers, or people in the sweatshops and stuff in the Southeast Asian countries and things like that. And people in Western countries that are food insecure and relying on government programs that are getting shut down and defunded and such, which is happening, I will stress. This isn't something we have to live with. This is an inequality we don't have to have as part of our world. we could change this if we all organize together. Right? Like it's not good enough. This is surely
True.
there is something inside you which sees this as revolting, right? Like the idea that because it does for me. Like for me,
people being held at gunpoint in the Congo is bad. I agree. I don't think that's a substantial criticism to the stuff I've actually said.
Okay, well, then what
is like intuition pumping to the worst example is something I wouldn't even consider really to be like strictly capitalist. I don't think people being held at gunpoint and forced to mine or whatever is actually like a strictly capitalist system or whatever. And I will say the same thing about like social systems. Like I don't think Cambodia was like I don't think it's fair to criticize socialism, on the basis of Cambodia specifically, like having some super bad systems or Stalin doing some super bad things.
The Soviet Union also wasn't socialist, so these.
Oh my God! Has there ever been a socialist country, bro?
But can there be a socialist country? The whole point is workers of the world, non-fun. The whole point is that we're overcoming things like nationalism.
So there can't be a socialist country at all. We have to have a worldwide socialist revolution. Okay, cool, incredible.
I mean, you can say things it shows that we're not quite engaging with what a socialist leaning person would say, right? Like if we're trying to, why do we have nationalisms and nations and such? These things stem ultimately from projects of capital, the idea that we can organize ourselves into little enclaves to the benefit of certain people within these things.
Okay, I just want to focus on the actual narrow claim. Okay, do you agree that just conceptually there are probably cases where like there's a trade-off between having some type of price mechanism that might price people out and having some type of like overall utility being increased in terms of the potential incentives for people to work, in terms of the potential incentives for people to innovate, the potential incentives for people to invest? Like, do you think if we just had like having a 100% capital gains tax like might make the world more equal? But do you agree that also plausibly would reduce the amount of investment that people are doing?
No, I completely disagree. I think right now we're squandering so much. Potential of people because of the fact that only some people can access.
No. I just want. What is the evidence that having a 100% capital gains tax would not reduce investment into whatever is being, taxed? The capital gains investment, whatever that is ultimately going to apply to.
I don't think that's a fair question to ask me, because right now we're in a world in which society is organized through capital and through this needing significant money to be able to instigate an idea, such, right? Like, of course you need the money, and of course said money is going to be owned by certain people, so you need said people. But that's a byproduct of the organization of the capitalist system, which concentrates power into
none of this is substantive. Wait, just to be clear, okay.
Sorry? Well, really, do you think substantive? It's an answer to your question.
I'm asking a very narrow question, and now we're like you're shifting to like, we live in a capitalist world where everything is shaped by capital.
No, because it's part of the answer.
You did not answer it substantially. Is that
a little bit? I genuinely, I don't think we're quite on the same. That's really bad, isn't it? Like, I don't believe in things like what am I saying? Okay, I don't think we're coming at this from the same angle. Like you say, oh, give me a narrow. Like, I've asked you a narrow question, but the answers that we're trying to find aren't constrained by such questions. I feel like we need to be thinking, connected more to issues more than just the example you gave, because it does naturally expand beyond more than just like a maths question, right? Like, it's not as though we're in a computer and we can plug in values for X and Y and just have an instant answer. The social world is more complex than this, and so to try and think back to your question, we're in a world that is sculpted by wealth, by capital. So to say, if you do you see that if you increase tax on capital, then it would potentially increase equality but have a negative effect on innovation and such? Well, how is innovation sculpted and defined? Why is innovation at the behest of capital and sort of sculpted through corporate power and the networks of wealth and such? Because of the world we've produced it in, because of the world that we live in. There's no reason that innovation couldn't come from guy in the rice field, or the guy in the mine in the Congo, or the guy in the production line at Foxconn. But they will never have the chance to realize this because they're trapped in a system.
If you're deciding what capital gains tax should be, if you're deciding what capital gains tax should be, or how much of the economy should be socially owned, or any of these questions, what evidence are we using to answer that question? Are we using just vibes about what could potentially happen under a social system, or like what the hell are we doing here?
Why are we? Yeah,
because that seems like that's what you're citing. Right? You're just citing, I could conceptually imagine social innovation coming from this person or whatever. Right?
You think it seems like this, and clearly you've read quite a lot of economics.
I'm being too channel. I'm being too channel with my words. You are doing this. You're not citing any evidence of me. All you're doing is constantly shifting to like some broader vibes-based picture of stuff.
You can't just call it vibes because it's not in an economy paper. I've cited plenty of things. You're not citing... The things I've cited have plenty of stats attached to them. Obviously, it's not as though I've just wandered onto the stream and... Sorry?
I don't even know how much actual like causal inference stats it has attached to it. I don't even think it has that much in it, bro.
Right. There's plenty in the papers I've cited. The fact that you said earlier, oh, well, we don't need to... What, sorry?
I said I'm sure.
Also, by the way, I'm not even. It's not like it's. I'm dismissing all the economy papers. I'm saying that the way that the data is represented, you fill in faces and such. What I'm saying is the way these papers are representing the social world is losing vast parts of the information. It's losing. You don't
know how they're representing the social world. You admit you don't know what PC is. You don't know how they're calculating hedonic adjustments. You don't know how they're how they change the basket of goods over time. Like you don't even know what they're doing. What do you mean?
What's this? These are words, right? Obviously, it's using the numbers and statistics and such to suggest trends and things like that, and show that spending may or may not have. Do you not see that I'm trying to say stuff, and you sort of just like coming to a conclusion about what I'm saying before you're hearing it, like you're snickering and such. Like,
don't think that's what I'm doing.
What?
I don't think I like. When I'm snickering or something is because like what like you're just doing the same thing repeatedly.
In what same thing?
Okay. Do it either like you don't substantially respond to my like questions and you shift to like some just like incredibly broad sort of I would say vibes based analysis.
You would say vibe based analysis.
But a lot of this seems to be. In the way that you're not actually like you're not presenting any evidence. You haven't even told me what type of evidence we should really be considering in a lot of these cases. You're simply giving me like some like broad argument of like, well, sort of more broadly philosophically, like there's no reason innovation couldn't come from a student in a rice farm, or when you do this analysis, you're missing some vibe, some fact on the ground.
I'm gonna say, see, is that something you don't agree with? Is that something that is an issue for you?
I don't agree that they're missing much. Oh, that someone hypothetically, yeah, I agree. I agree. Someone in a rice field could innovate, and I'm sure there are plenty of examples historically. People from rice fields doing innovation. I also think all else equal, if you reduce
as the CEO,
if
given the same resources.
So, like. All else equal, probably, but I would guess that CEOs are probably disproportionately like smarter people on average, and therefore, like in the real world, they probably would have some.
Based on they had the resources to be able to gain the education and such they've had, and be able to operate in a business world, but not inherently.
So are we assuming these people? So it's the question, or if we assume two people are like just of equal intelligence and are of equal skill already, like would they have the same?
You can measure it properly. Intelligence is a very subjective and multi faceted thing.
But you recognize we have measures of intelligence that will correlate with like the number of patents you have, right? Like that is something that we can see some correlation between.
The audio cut out. Say that again, please.
You recognize like there are measures of intelligence we have, even if you want to call them perfect, that will probably correlate with how many patents someone gets, or what level of job they're in. It's not going to be perfect correlation or anything.
They're socially mediated. They come through the social world. They're also objective to the sort of person that's designing the test. And whilst of course they are useful in some contexts, they don't mean someone is inherently smarter than someone else. And certainly don't mean that the CEO who's had the formal education and such isn't massively benefiting from environmental differences in their upbringing and such, which make them smarter and more able to innovate potentially than someone in the rice field.
I agree with that.
And well, then there we go. There's no reason someone in the rice field couldn't.
Well, no. So I agree the CEO is benefiting from environmental factors. That is certainly true. There's also probably some aspect of it that is genetic. I don't know how big that effect is, to be fair. But
genetic. God.
We learn. Plausibly some amount of intelligence is going to be genetic, right? But I don't know how big that effect is. I've never looked into it. But that's most likely the case that
some patterns, some things, in the sense of someone's, I don't know, you inherit you like some sort of eyesight thing, and it's like it makes it harder to recognize patterns and such, right? Like it's obviously there's some elements of things, but something like intelligence is such a broad word and exists in so many different ways. It's not just like, you got an A on this paper, therefore you're more intelligent than someone who got a B. Like it's something which exists in so many different contexts that to say, oh, well, this person is genetically more intelligent than someone else, I think is not something we should do. And I'm not saying that you're necessarily saying this, but clearly when we rely on tests and we sort of lean into, oh, well, these people are more innovative, therefore they are more suited to the upper positions and therefore should be a million times richer than someone else. Lends itself
so
to
I don't think I'm making a claim that strong. So where to start it was simply.
I don't think you are. No. I'm saying that can be.
No, because so I don't actually believe like in the deservedness of any like income you get even from your own innovations necessarily, because like I do, fundamentally, like I'm a utilitarian. I care about what's better for everyone overall. That's not always going to align with sort of some moral claim that we think you might have to some innovation or whatever. And I don't believe a lot of those moral claims hold because I essentially a determinist. I don't believe in I don't believe in free will of the type that would actually grant you like any that type of moral claim. I think it is all down to genetics and environment that you don't really control. But regardless, I do still think that there's going to be trade-offs involved in these things, and taxing and reducing the after-tax return to investment and probably getting less investment. And I think there are more efficient ways that you can, tax stuff that can avoid those problems and still raise a lot of money that you could even redistribute to have relatively expansive welfare programs. But I think those trade-offs exist. And I also think it's probably the case that CEOs are disproportionately the type of people who are likely to have a higher capacity for innovation. Now, maybe that's because of the underlying social factors, but like if the hypothetical is we take a person who's a CEO right now and a random person off the street who's more likely to be innovative, I'd probably say the CEO. If the hypothetical is, let's just assume two people are essentially the same, one of them happens to be the CEO, one of them happens to be someone in the rice field, I would say they probably have an equal chance of being innovative in that case. But yeah, that was just what I was saying to your initial thing.
Well, I think there's also, because I agree, right? Like, of course, chances are someone who's a CEO likely has been through various educational establishments and so is likely more suited to the world of business and such. But I don't think that's necessarily even true, right? Because there's also an element of, in the business world, you're looking to maintain the wealth and grow the money and such. Like, you want to be a powerful economic person on the capitalist market. And so you aren't necessarily even innovating your...
But that would probably give you an incentive to innovate, right? Insofar as you want to compete with other businesses, you probably have some incentive to innovate.
All right, yeah,
I mean, I agree technically, not necessarily, but overwhelmingly.
Well, again, you want to maintain your capital, right? You want to be the top dog on the market, or near the top, and able to have the life that having lots of capital grants you. So, whilst of course making great products every year is one way of doing it, another way is ensuring you aren't touchable on the top. It's like to win a race, right? You don't have to be as fast as Usain Bolt and set world records, just to be better than the person in second. So in this case, the people in second, because obviously there's other corporations, but they aren't really the issue. The issue are the masses, the workers. And so you create or cultivate a system in which very, very few people can ever really have the capital to challenge you. And the people whose labor you need to be able to generate your wealth and such are in a sort of relatively fixed position. So you are, say, the CEO of a corporation.
There are other firms that have the capital to challenge you, right?
Yeah, of course, but they aren't really the ones that you're as concerned about, right? Because like say with tech companies, right? There's lots of tech companies, but they largely have the same-ish profiles, and they all rely on massive labor networks across the world, which are heavily exploited and paid nowhere near the same as those on top, because the market forces allow,
so I don't see how that's not related to your point.
It is
point you just made, which it seemed like you were saying essentially you're just worried that firms just like to maintain your capital, people are going to extract rents. They're not actually going to innovate. They're just going to do things to maintain some amount of monopoly power. I don't view whether or not they hire people in the third world as relevant or irrelevant to that. Like, I think that's
it's entirely relevant, because let's say you are your company makes smartphones, right? Rare metals that you need to produce electronic goods come from extremely exploitative conditions in the global south. So you are massively benefiting from the essentially slave labor that is used to extract these metals. If one day these workers said, actually, let's change this, and obviously we're able to overthrow the militias and stuff that are maintaining these mines, and said, actually, we would like a fair price.
Before we talk about the workers, just before I just want to focus on the fact that you recognize other firms can challenge the status of one firm as a as the dominant player in the market or whatever, right? Like Apple has an incentive to innovate because Samsung is also doing innovation, right? Like if you want to maintain your status as a company or whatever, you don't only extract rents, you also have to have some degree of innovation. And we probably disagree on the amount of rent extraction that's happening. I don't think it's particularly high. I don't think there's evidence of that, but certainly they are doing a lot of innovation because other firms compete with them.
There's not evidence of what? Sorry.
I don't believe there's evidence in sort of markets broadly in the U.S. becoming like substantially less competitive, and firms innovating a lot less because of that.
It's competitive for the like billion tiers and such, but people right at the top. It's not for the average person. It's not for even the above average person. It's very much, especially in terms of tech and such, it's dominated by a few organizations and a few people at the top, and be able to access that market.
Is the claim there that because there are so few people at the top, like they're extracting rents, they're not actually innovating, or is the claim there simply that
I can't hear what
people lack extracting rents, economic rents, unearned rents, unearned payments, basically.
Yeah. So these, we were talking about innovation and such, and why you don't necessarily have to innovate. These corporations are in competition, but it's like a closed league, isn't it? There's no, even if one of them blows up entirely, there's still, the people at the top are still in control of enough wealth to be able to be fine, right? And they aren't under any threat from the people they rely on.
If you're the owner of a firm or a stakeholder in a firm,
you can over me again. If you're
because none of this is.
But not because now you know what I'm going to say if you talk before I finish a sentence.
I know that the route you're going down is not actually addressing the point I'm concerned about right now.
You got telepathic powers?
I'm fairly confident what you're saying has nothing to do with what the incentives for business owners or stakeholders of businesses to innovate because they're competing against other firms. So I just want to. I am fairly confident in that assessment because you were not. Were you going to talk about the different models of competition and how we measure concentration in markets and how those affect markups? I don't think so. So I'm just obviously.
So then, that doesn't matter. That's because you don't necessarily think it's interesting. I mean, it's not something that you can just stop and such.
That matters to how competitive U.S. markets are.
The markets being uncompetitive is linked to what I was going to say. But we're talking about why. But
we're talking about different things. You're saying workers don't have the ability to rise up and challenge us or whatever.
Apple and stuff. No. But, to challenge the networks of capital which dominate our lives and such. and in places like the Congo and Southeast Asia lead to severe threats to human life, active slavery and such, and death and dire consequences. And the wider environmental devastation happening, which all this is connected, right? Like it's all something we should be thinking about when we're thinking about the markets and capitalism and such. It's why we want to be thinking about the fact we've handed so much power to people who I'm sure obviously have to. I'm not saying it's sort of Apple have could just release some brick or something and sorry guys, this is it now. But they are in a market in which there aren't really any threats to their position as holders of significant power in society under the current model we have because of their inordinate wealth.
I don't even want to grant you this agreement because I don't actually think you're arriving at this conclusion through like genuine reason or whatever. So there's a little bit of agreement in that, like, I think Apple kind of has like network effects and the such that that make their position very hard to challenge because people are used to having their iPhone. They have brand loyalty. They buy an iPhone because other people have iPhones, and they have a walled garden that integrates everything seamlessly. So there's a narrow view where I somewhat accept that, but I don't think it's true that Apple has very little incentive to innovate because people aren't challenging them to any degree in the smartphone market or the home electronics market generally. I think you do see Apple innovating. I think you do see I don't know Apple specifically, but I don't think you see like a substantial rise in like markups, for example, which is kind of what you would expect if firms really had this much power over the market or whatever. No one was really challenging them. I cut you off there. I don't see good evidence that markups have substantially risen in the U.S. economy for the past like 30 years. There are economists you can find that defend a more narrow version of that claim, but I don't think anything approaching what you sort of view.
I mean, yes, there have been markups, and there has been.
I agree. There's always been markups
costs and things. Not to the extent we're seeing now. Certainly not to the level of absurdity. And like you just said that. I don't believe you have any evidence to support that, though. So, like, what is the evidence that markups have risen substantially in the last 10, 20, 30 years, or like anything like? Oh, the costs have gone up for all these things that we.
Do you know what a markup is versus just the cost of a product?
But where the price is artificially risen, right? Like it slaps up.
Well, it's not artificial necessarily.
It's not artificial. Of course it is.
I mean, firms are expected to make a normal profit in the short run, right? You engage in business because in the short run it's profitable to do so. It's normal to have some markup. It's obviously
which is
markets
part of
are
what's
not
being
all
criticized, right? Like we're in a fairer and better system that good we're producing is something felt equitably, and it's something that everyone is able to participate in the benefits of, not some sort of person at the top siphoning their disproportionately large share and not quite the same being realized for everyone else. Certainly not the people in the Congo who had to go into the mine to make all this possible, right? But yes, I think if we look at how much things cost, certainly in the sort of tech side of things, they are increased substantially than a decade ago, 20 years ago. And I think that it isn't
I don't even know if the quality adjusted price of most tech products has gone up.
Quality adjusted
if I gave you
price.
Yeah, like the price of tech products, like home electronics, whatever you want to measure. I'm not sure if the quality adjusted price of them has even gone up.
What do you mean by quality adjusted? Like,
I mean in that you count in the price sort of how much the computer can actually do, right? Like how fast the computer is, how loud the speaker is, right?
How is that calculated?
So, like generally speaking, you try to do hedonic adjustments. I think that there are slightly differing methodologies within PCE and CPI and how to do them. But you try to account for essentially how much in the rise of the price of a product is accompanied by accounted for just the increase in the the quality of the product itself. So of the things that you can measure, like for example, how much RAM is in a computer or in a phone, how much of the price going up, in a 1 year time span is explained by the fact that this phone just has more RAM in it now, and you can calculate that by just looking at the price of RAM and trying to account for those things. That's roughly the methodology.
And who decides how much a price should go up based on how much more this computer can do, in terms of processing power and such?
I believe they look at the market price for these things to try to estimate the cost to the firm.
And who decides the market price?
It's an interaction between buyers and sellers, and depends on how much power each have, and depends on how much concentration there is in the market, and depends on
who decides the market price.
There's no answer. There's no simple answer to that question.
There isn't there? There is an answer, because that interaction is, of course, between peoples, but who is the person deciding the price of the thing being sold?
It's an interaction between buyers and sellers, and it depends on how elastic the demand is, and it depends on how concentrated the market is, and how much firm,
I can interact,
how much power.
I can interact non-fun all I like with these corporations, but who decides what the price is?
So market prices are
who decides
decided by a complex mechanism of.
I'm sure it's very complex, but who decides?
I'm telling you.
Yeah, and I'm asking you to tell me who sets the price.
There's no individual who decides it. There's no individual. Right? So the market price is determined based on supply and demand, based on the elasticity of supply and demand, based on how much market power firms have.
Lots of factors go in. Lots of factors go into this price that's set, but who decides the price at the end of the day? Who's deciding the price? Who looked at these factors and said, "Yeah, we're going to put this price up to, make more money and such"? Who sets the price at the end of the day?
Oh my! Are you just saying the seller is the one that puts the price tag on the product?
Yes, pretty much. The price has gone up because the seller wanted to make more money.
Just would you view hypothetically, hypothetically,
in a second hypothetical, non-fun, right? But this language we use when we're talking about all these different economic adjustments and all these different measurements and such, ultimately stem back to the capitalist, the person who's setting the price in the first place. So when we're saying, it's all adjusted and it's all accounted for, and it's a relation and such, ultimately all the power still sits with the people who own all the stuff in the first place. So yes, I would say absolutely. What doesn't follow?
Just because the seller sometimes puts the price tag on the product doesn't mean they're the one with all the power, right? Like McDonald's cannot charge $100 for a Big Mac because Burger King sells similar products for under that price.
No, but they're still happy to charge a price they know they can make a profit off, because they know it consolidates their power. What
determines the price they can make a profit off of?
In the market forces and such, which are sculpted
exactly
by
what
them.
I said. It's going to depend on the pricing power firms have. It's going to depend on the elasticity demand from consumers.
Yes, and all of those things are things they are able to influence because of their disproportionate control of the market.
Not that much.
Yes, that much. Because
just give me. There's an example. Hold on. There's an example of this you can actually say. For example, how does a firm make the elasticity demand for consumers more inelastic?
How does no, why don't you tell me?
Wait, so you don't have an answer? So you don't even know the ways they could do that?
I'm asking you to tell me.
I'm just saying, you're saying that you have examples and you don't even have one.
I was talking about a minute ago about how markets are dominated by capitalist forces and such, and how the way prices.
I literally gave you an example too, which is great. You could, so a firm could create network effects. Could try to create network effects, for example, like Apple has done by having only. I mean, the regulation made them get rid of this, but having only blue bubbles, with other iPhone users, right? That's an example of essentially increasing the switching cost for consumers because you built up, some type of walled garden, some type of network effect there. There are mechanisms by which firms can make demand more inelastic, right? That's the thing that can't happen, but you don't even understand enough to cite those. But just hypothetically, okay? This is hypothetical. if there was an economist, named, something like Vernon Smith, hypothetically, and let's say like in the 60s, he did like a number of lab experiments, and let's say hypothetically he tested the exact things that we're talking about right now, as in, he tested if you only give when running auctions, when you only give sellers the ability to list a price, or when you only give buyers the ability to bid on things, or when you let sellers and buyers both interact with prices or whatever. Like, hypothetically, if he came to the conclusion that all these methods came incredibly close to the true price, and sellers did not actually have more price setting power, and when they only set the price, in fact, guess what? Sellers actually had less, but they had lower markups in the setting where they had where they were the only ones that listed the price, because they were in more intense competition with other sellers. They have to reveal information first. Would that change your mind at all with regard to who sets the price on stuff?
These experiments don't quite correlate to a world in which vast amounts of capital across different forms are owned by said corporations. So going back to McDonald's, sorry?
Do you agree
what did you say?
that what you said earlier?
What did you say a second ago? What did you say just while I was speaking? You said something.
I said, oh my God. Because it's not a answer to my... Because
five words in and you're interrupting again, basically, is what you did.
You're not substantially engaging.
No, but how? Why
you're supposed to be back to some real world thing. I just want the point right now. I'm trying to get you to
I'm literally trying to answer your question, and then you jump in with some silly little comment and looking off to the side and such. Like, how can you
agree? I mean, I'm a shadow, but do you agree that it's not the case that just because the firm is the one that, lists the price, that they necessarily have more power in that interaction? In fact, in some cases, because, firms, if they are the ones that have to reveal information first, they can actually have lower markups in the case where, only sellers are allowed to list a price.
Again, sorry. I hit my hand on the desk and I didn't hear what you said. Sorry. Say again.
I should do that, Chordsky. Wait, okay, can you just repeat the claim that I made about the auctions back to you? Like what was my point there?
What was your point when?
When I was telling you about these auctions and about sellers and buyers having to reveal prices first. What was my point there? What was I trying to get you to?
You were trying to get me to think about the fact that there's many different forces in the market which have an influence on how someone's able to mediate the market, and that a seller is obviously competing with others. There's different ways in which they are having to think about how they can price something before they just say, I want to put it at this price. Now, to be honest, I've not been quite a few times just then, for instance, I didn't quite hear what was said, like when I asked you to repeat yourself and such. And every time, or quite a few times, I've tried to respond to what you've said. It's like you jump in straight away, and so it sort of loses some of the track of what has been said.
Okay.
Now, that didn't quite match up with what you said, then I apologize. But when you jump in, sometimes that's what happens. Right? Now, if I didn't hear what you said and I've misrepeated it, then I'm happy to hear it again, and we can go from there. If that is
okay. Do you agree that there are lab experiments that conflict with the view you presented, which is that because sellers are the ones that put the price label on the product, that they then have some price setting power?
I think that a lab experiment is very different to the wider social world. I think when we spoke about McDonald's,
just real quick, would it change your mind if hypothetically people recreated this very same experiment with actual markets? Like, people have they've created, they've studied actual farmers markets where this stuff happens. It's not the case that this is just lab experiments.
No, I don't think it's quite the same as what has been said. And I also think that it's not quite as analogous with those things, right? It's not as though we're talking about sort of small scale experiments. We're looking at the wider portrait of the planet. And so, as I've been trying to do a few times now, you mentioned McDonald's not being able to put a Big Mac up to $100, right? But what McDonald's have is vast networks of capital across different continents, right? They own so much land around the world. They own so many stores in countries. They know they don't necessarily need to sell food at extortionate prices because they dominate the market. They have so much power. And I would also say that they also have put their prices up. And now the stuff that you could buy years ago is now more expensive. So I wouldn't
But
even say that.
I don't know if McDonald's markups have increased.
What's it not following?
I'm saying it doesn't follow that McDonald's market power or their markups have increased, right? Because they could just be increasing prices because of like supply side effects on their own supply chain, right?
Yeah,
they could be responding to a general.
But they are, because they're putting that price onto their consumers, and it's all artificial anyway. It's all things which, in a fairer world,
but you
wouldn't
agree if you
need to even be put up, because it's something that could be. It's a markup because it's someone at the higher ups in the company and such thinking, well, we don't want to eat into our profits, so everyone else can increase the price. And they know that their competitors in the other corporations do very similar. So, they, to all various extents, still have the same experience of, wealth and power and such. We still have the same consolidation of market. I will say it's getting slightly late in the UK, and my voice is starting to go.
Yeah. I have one friend of mine. I think you know Sample Text. He said he wants to ask one question to you before we close out. So could I?
Sample Text. He was one saying slurs and something in the chat earlier. So I don't know if I'm necessarily interested in whatever this guy's going to be potentially asking me. Go on, but what is it?
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
I guess
you do not believe me. You can swallow the text and find
where
I'm
just
it
saying,
was.
I'm saying I understand. I'm saying sure. I'm saying fine. Whatever.
It didn't sound like it.
Okay. Okay. I guess so one final thing. I don't know how much time you have exactly, but
I've got a bit of time. I'm just saying that I might soon have to head off because.
Okay. Are you So are you familiar with like David Splinter's work at all?
David Splinter? No, I'm not familiar with his work.
Okay. Are you familiar with okay, so I guess I would add. Okay, so when you talk about wealth inequality in the U.S., I know you live in the UK, whatever. I guess what do you look for evidence that wealth inequality and or income inequality has like exploded in the U.S. or whatever?
Well, you get like stats and such, which filter their way through various social media and things like that. But the sort of papers I was citing earlier cite plenty of statistics, and these statistics come from various bodies, poverty centers and such. Like probably the same sort of ones you were using earlier, right? And I would say that there's also an element of qualitative work that should be done. When people say they can't afford to access certain things, there is an element of, okay, well, why are they saying that? And being able to look at the portrait of society that is generated from it. We're still largely using the same sorts of sources. It's how the data they produce is analyzed, I think, which perhaps is differing here.
Kind of. I mean, there are different assumptions people make with regards to certain stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. I mean, for one, I think if you poll Americans on like their individual financial situation, even if you just want to look at that, most of them do rate it relatively positive. Now, I think it's typically better to look at more actual fundamental like metrics or whatever, like how, like what percent of income people are spending on food or on necessities or on gas or whatever, or like what what has the real price of food increased over time or whatever. And like those metrics are all they look pretty good for American households, even the relatively poor American households. Like I said, even
not good
just
enough,
polls in an individual financial situation. I mean,
not good enough.
A lot of stuff's not going to be good enough, but.
I mean, okay. Like even that quality, I think.
I mean, what would be good enough to you?
Well, no one should have to face the inequalities that we sort of see, and no one should be in food insecurity or in a healthcare crisis and not able to pay for it. Like that's sort of, I suppose, perhaps why we seem to be at such odds, because ultimately, we both are largely saying the same. statements in a lot of ways. And I obviously had some disagreement today, but we're largely sharing some elements of our analysis and such. But I would say that you don't seem to. You said yourself, right? Trade-offs, like the trade-offs of the system, are largely there. And in my mind, that's just not acceptable. And I would say to move towards a world where there's no one in situation of adversity, which is something we should aim for. No matter how difficult that journey is, we should aim to be the best as we can, right? As good as possible, and then push it further. To get there, we've got to critically analyze the system we're in now, which doesn't have that in place whatsoever. Someone going into a mine, a barrel of a gun to produce something where everyone takes for granted, like that is something which is horrifying. So that is a lot of where I'm coming from with this. Like we need to think better than what we have. Yeah, wouldn't you agree?
I think trade-offs are just a thing that factually exists, and so I'm concerned about maximizing expected value for people, right? And that even involves like I'm a relatively left-leaning person. That even involves a somewhat expansive welfare state, because I believe there are a lot of gains from redistribution to be had that keep people out of poverty. I just think that trade-offs are things that factually exist, and we can measure them, and we have studies that look at different types of economic system, different incentives, and we have to consider these trade-offs when doing policy. And I think the best way to do that is by weighing evidence that's largely produced by economists. But without reiterating that whole thing, I just want to.
But these economists, the portrait of society they portrayed is lacking depth. It's lacking that social character, which suggests there is something wrong, which is felt by people intuitively in society. And I think that is where we're diverging, right? Because largely, you were sort of laughing at the fact that I wasn't as familiar with some of the economic terms you were using, right? Like some of the stuff that you were saying, maybe I wasn't as familiar with as you. But I think that sort of doesn't really matter as such, because ultimately when these terms are used to defend a system which isn't working, which isn't really livable for a lot of people, as has been noted by many academics, many sources, many investigations into the social world. What, sorry?
Nothing. I just said yeah.
Right. If it's if this is happening in society, and there's clearly something's not right. It's clearly Trump in the White House. You've got far right in the UK rising. You've got all these people who have a clear aim of causing discontent and bad things in society, pursuing some of the same economic goals that have been the dominant ones in society for a very long time. That should make us think something is seriously wrong with how we've been conducting our society. And it can't just be explained away with an economics chart that has a line going up, or someone saying, well...
Okay, well, to talk about line going up, briefly, just a more concrete claim, okay? From the evidence I've seen, I've come to the view that wealth inequality in the U.S. over the past 40 years or so has not meaningfully increased when you account for Social Security, which is obviously some type of benefit, future income that every American can sort of expect to receive. It is equivalent to some type of annulment that every American is entitled to. And those at the lower classes are sort of disproportionately entitled to more than they pay into it. And I think income inequality, once you look at the taxes and transfers that the U.S. has, that is also not, post-tax income inequality is not really gone up much in the U.S. either. I'm primarily citing the work there's these two economists, David Splinter and Gerald Austin. I think they have some papers on it, and I don't even want to give you this because I don't actually think you're arriving at these conclusions through that much reason. There are some critiques that you can make about the assumptions they make about unreported income, but I think largely their work is pretty good. And I can send you some graphs from their work and stuff. It just seems, post-tax income inequality, because we have such a progressive tax and transfer system in the U.S., it just has not meaningfully gone up in the U.S. in the last few decades, and nor has wealth inequality when you include Social Security.
I'd be very happy to read any of these papers that you've suggested and recommended in this stream and such, of course. I think that wealth inequality is, for one, even if it hadn't changed in the last 40 years, which I'll stress it has got, there is clearly a wealthier body in society. But
the Social Security Trust Fund has also grown significantly, right?
A more politically connected group in society as well, especially in this Trump administration.
But just real quick, you agree that the Social Security Trust Fund has grown like trillions of dollars since in this time period too, right?
More people. So yes, I would say, of course.
But we're doing this per capita too, right?
This statistic doesn't really change the central point, which is that the wealth inequality allows for disproportionate power for the capitalist organization in society to wield over the masses, hence the lack of democracy, hence the severe inequality, hence the degradation of democracy even, right? Like the fact that there is not the say, right now in America, we do not, you, but then also as sort of in a second-hand way, right? We don't have the ability to be able to say and do what should be done in our societies. We don't have that actual expression and freedom and power and such. We're largely at the behest of larger projects of capital. Before I go into sorry?
That seems increasingly untrue as independent media is becoming a bigger thing.
Independent media? Are you kidding? Like, in what way?
In the sense that anyone can start a podcast, in a sense that many of the people who make the biggest podcasts, Joe Rogan, Nick Fuentes, all the most famous people are
heavily sponsored by the same projects of capital. They're both massively funded by networks of wealth, I don't think which reproduce the same right-wing ideas.
Well, I think the structure of independent media can create misinformation for sure, and a lot of times it tends to be right wing.
Yeah.
But
and why? Do you think
so I don't think you would disagree with the point that we kind of used to have gatekeepers in the sense that, like, in order to work at some media organization that would play on TV that people actually knew of and would watch, you had to be some respectable journalist with, permissible opinions on stuff. That is no longer the case. You can be Joe Rogan. You can talk about ivermectin and whatever you want on your podcast that goes to millions of people. You can talk about you can be Nick Fuentes and talk about the Jews and the immigrants and black people on your Rumble stream that goes to hundreds of thousands to millions of people. Like those sort of there have been a lot of checks on who can reach a lot of people that have been removed by social media, essentially.
Yeah, like I get what you're saying, but obviously it's one form of capital to another, right? Like, so yes, you're right. You had to have been connected with a traditional big media outlet, but just as they were shaped by capital to varying degrees, this is also mediated by it. Like the early days of the internet, where genuinely it was whoever just has, the voice on the platform can say it, is different to now, where said influencers you mentioned are hugely sponsored by financial incentives. Like, it's for as much as anyone can start a podcast or a video series or whatever. So, without a tremendous amount of luck, ones that have the wealth behind them will have a better chance of being broadcast to a further audience and such. And better yet, the ones who can expand their reach into political spheres too, because if you're advocating for a worldview which supports said wealthy entities and such, they're going to think, okay, well, let's give this guy a bit of a boost. And so, lo and behold, many of the figures with this heavily right-wing worldview end up with the connections to, Trump and the White House and such. And I think
I'm not sure how you could test this stuff, though, is the issue, because you could imagine someone is just naturally kind of popular and they have some right-wing talking points.
I'm not saying,
and they and they get sponsorships as a result of that.
Yeah, obviously you need to. It's not it's just some kid that they've just grabbed. But at the same time, it is sculpted through this lens, because what's popular, like, firstly, popularity is subjective. Like, what you like is not necessarily going to be what is right? Like, I'm sure there's like music, for instance. Your music taste don't have to necessarily be in who's got the most sales of their song this week, but equally, these things are sculpted by it, because the people who have the access to the things which make it easier to be more palatable viewing experience, audio experience and such, have all resources a lot of the time going in. And certainly advertising is one of them, making the independent side of independent media not quite so, because they still rely on the same, it's still in the market. It's still something which can be massively affected by capital networks outside of the stuff being produced itself.
Sure. So I think the disagreement there specifically is going to be a little more marginal than a lot of the disagreement we've had. I think so. The most concerning thing I have, or the biggest concern I have with like wealth inequality, income inequality, is the sort of disproportionate political influence that it could lead to. I think that's typically the thing that I'm most concerned about. Now we probably have different views on the how big that effect actually is. I think certainly in the Trump administration, there's reasonable concern that is like relatively big. It seems like now it is the case that you might be able to get a favor from the president if you are able to buy enough of his meme coin and sort of rub shoulders with him. But I would operate obviously in a framework where there are a lot of trade-offs between taxing people to the extent where they don't have this type of influence because they just don't have that much money, and have any of the benefits we would experience from democracy, especially because there are probably other mechanisms we can choose to limit the ability of billionaires to influence the government, although to some extent maybe those are always subject to bad actors like Trump sort of ignoring rules or changing rules or whatever. I just think that the sort of more narrow claim I made earlier is it seems to be the case that if you account for the sort of transfers people get, the fact that people get Medicaid and food stamps and cash transfer or refundable tax credits from the government, it doesn't seem that post-tax income inequality in the U.S. has gone up particularly much. And it also seems like that, if you just look at the growth of income, of real income, inflation adjusted income post-tax, that has been trending upward for all income quintiles. And in fact, a lot of the growth in the lowest income quintile is strictly from transfers. And maybe you can say that's a problem in its own right, but it seems to be the case that the government is doing a okay-ish job. I don't think it's doing it as efficiently as it could at sort of taking away from the rich and giving to the poor and making sure their income is still growing.
No, I don't think that taken away from the rich. And I don't think that quite captures the. But no, I feel like for what was I like I was going to say something, then it's just in my mind. Yeah, no, I don't think the political description that's been given quite, because you're right, like the government of course does things to help the working class and such, and the poor and such, and people who are reliant on these programs. I don't think at any point I've said, oh yes, they've torn up everything and there's nothing whatsoever. But
my point there is it seems like we have an overall progressive tax and transfer system that has actually done a pretty good job at keeping incomes growing, even for the poorest people who haven't seen a significant growth in market income.
It's done a job to some extent, but not enough of an extent. And at the moment now, and certainly over the last, since Reagan basically, the effect of this has reproduced decreasing standards and poor situations for many Americans, even more so now that the more right-wing president Trump has taken over. I will say, I would happily continue were it not approaching the end of the day in the UK.
Yeah, no worries. Of course.
And whether or not you want to invite me back on or whatever is entirely up to you. But should the opportunity arise,
So no worries. Yeah, no worries. I'm totally down to continue the conversation at some point. But yeah, I obviously it's late for you. It's not really late for me, but I've been my sleep schedule is a little wonky, so I might genuinely just go to bed right after this as well. But yeah, I guess I'll let you make your closing. Make sure to shout yourself out and bring up any points that you think relevant to bring up.
Yeah, well, I mean, you already said my channel name and such, which is I'm sure I'll leave a comment or something, and you can click on the link to go to that. But yeah, I just think that all the sort of stuff we've said, like ultimately, the reason that we want a better world should be also hopefully that we have the shared appreciation for life, right? Like we want the best for people, and in my mind, there's something truly unalienable about the way that people in society have to live in the conditions that our capitalist world has set for it, and be it in the Western world where we obviously still enjoy a quality of life above that of the rest of the world, or be it in the global South where things are not that, and connecting even that inequality to the wider problems of our social world. The fact that the colonial period stole this wealth almost from the global South and elevated Western countries above the rest of the world. All these things connect and make us think we need to do so much better than what we have now. And for as much as solutions and logics are produced by economists to try and illustrate that things are okay or things can be solved within the system, and even ignoring the fact that it's not even necessarily the economist itself, the fact that it's people taking a statistic and saying, yes, well, this indicates that things are okay, loses a vast portion of the social fabric of the world. And it's something which, even if we're not necessarily familiar with all the terms that are used, and even if we maybe even forget the meaning of something because we're in the middle of a live stream and we're in a conversation, we can still see that something is wrong and something maybe even radical needs to be done to address this solution.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll talk again at some point. I was end by saying, okay, hedonic, act utilitarianism, MOGs, okay, maximize expected value, okay. What's this nonsense about inequality mattering? Capitalism, MOGs, okay, or at least some conception of liberal capitalism. They're favoring liberty. We're not calling me a capitalist, but whatever, capitalism, MOGs, okay. Welfare, pretty good, but I think redistribution is better than the pre-distributed systems. Usually opposed to it, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll talk again later. It was a fun time. So yeah. Are you? Hello?
Oh, God, are you still? Sorry, I thought you were. My mistake. Oh, sorry. Right. Yeah. See you in a bit. Thanks again. Bye.
Yeah. No worries. Okay. No, I just didn't. Okay. What's up?
Listen, Alphon. I should have went to sleep an hour ago. But
That's true.
it was like watching a car, like a crash in like slow motion. It's like I cannot take my eyes off, It's like I had to keep looking. Owen, you know me. We go way back. I didn't call you a retard. I called non-fun a retard. I would never call you that. I would never, ever, ever, ever call you that. I would never, ever, ever call you that. But either way, what do you think about it today? What do you think? What are yours? I want to hear from you.
It's difficult to deal.
Why are you so
rhetorically.
nice? Why are you so fucking nice? Why are you being nice to that person?
I feel like it comes off as so mean and stuff when you are mean, and like when he's complaining about interrupting and stuff, and it.
That's the point. No, don't interrupt. Don't interrupt. Let him babble on. In fact, it's good for you that you don't interrupt. He says stupid shit. Everyone can tell he says stupid shit. And then you say, PCE. And he never heard these words before. He's talking about cost of living for like 8 years or something. And he doesn't even know what PCE is in the United States. Right? And so you just let him expose his ignorance. You don't interrupt. You nicely let him finish. And then you're like, oh, you don't even know what this is. And then he asks you, oh, what are like the hedonic adjustments? And he expects you to give like the entire formula and how they source it and like how the reports yourself. But when he says inequality and you ask him, oh, what's the formula for the Gini coefficient? He wouldn't know.
Yeah, it's
Right. So like, yeah, that's what you should do. You should like let him finish, expose himself, because like that's the type of person that like will expose himself. And then ask him a basic question. I think for one, you should have asked him, can you think, okay, you think supply and demand obviously doesn't explain this work. Do you even know the supply and demand theory? And like, yeah, okay, can you draw a basic level 0 supply and demand curve? Not with any special properties or policy. Just a basic supply and demand curve. Can you do that? And he won't. He couldn't. I'll bet like 5% of my net worth he could not. So
having considered though, he cited the study that had very good stats in it
that had nothing to do with Snap. It like mentioned Snap once by saying, defunding Snap is also like cruel, and like this one paper from like a university in New York found that like Medicaid cuts are bad. It's like nothing. He doesn't read. He doesn't know econometrics. He is econometrically illiterate. He flipped out that I called him that in Convoy's chat, but clearly he doesn't know econometrics. I'll make it clear here. I'll be very happy to talk to him. He doesn't want to talk to me because I called him a slur. Oh my god. Oh, I was mean. I was mean. Oh. But if he doesn't want to talk to me because I called him a mean word, that's his prerogative. I don't respect that, but whatever. But I'll be very happy to talk to him. In fact, I'll do it next week. I'm out of town, but I'll be able to. I'll manage. I think it'll be easy. But yeah, he won't. Yeah. You see why I'm like getting mad. It's like, look. We're economists, right? We like economics. Okay. I don't have a degree, but we like economics. We're economic hobbyists, right? Incentives matter, right? We agree.
Now, have you considered they play into like a broader social formation that's been formed by capital? So
that's true. That's true. Yeah, because the people that look, but non-fun. Wait. Let me turn on my camera. I have new glasses, by the way. Non-fun.
Incredible.
It's yeah. It's the social environment, because the people at the top, they're still they're still managing everything, and so even if some things are getting better with the numbers and the stats, that's abstracted. You gotta look at the real story of the people at the top, and the colonized people actually are like what kind of matters in the story, and that's what the numbers kind of abstract away. And it's that's kind of
what I should have done. Actually, I should have said, if you really care about the colonized people, you would support open borders. And right now, open borders or closed borders is the number one thing keeping people in poverty.
Let's go. Total neoliberal victory. No, but it's like, oh yeah, Social Security spending as a percentage of GDP has been up. Oh, is that adjusted for inflation? I've heard people say that before. Is that adjusted for inflation, Mr. Non-Fun? Is the percentage adjusted for inflation? Yeah. Did you divide a percentage by a price index? That's what he's asking. He doesn't know that that's what he's asking, right? He doesn't know. How are the glasses on me, by the way?
They're good. They make you seem incredibly intelligent.
That's right.
This guy knows what he's. This guy's a neoliberal
ball.
I can trust.
I know ball. Look at Mankey, right? I think he has glasses. He looks very smart.
He does.
So he smiles and he has glasses. See, the problem with Owen is that he doesn't have glasses. No, but I'm saying it like one wonders how like you can like possibly talk about this for like a decade.
Wants his face on stream. I don't
and like not know any of this. I don't know. I think that's silly. But yeah. Either way. That aside. Why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you not meaner? Put aside, Owen, why are you not meaner to? Because look. Every time you go on the public square and you say dumb shit, there should be that like you're impacting people. That's an externality. There should be some internalization of this cost, and we call that shame in society. We call that shame. If you don't feel shame, you're not paying the cost of what you're doing. and that's bad. And so you either feel shame and you shut the fuck up, or you speak it because it's worth it. And then, we get less of that, but at least you say what you feel is really, really, really important. Or you do better. You lower the cost by saying actually smart stuff, by learning. I don't expect him to do that, but at least he's more likely to. But Charsky, I got to go to sleep. I'll get like 4 hours of sleep. That's okay. That's okay.
I gotta go to sleep too at some point, but yeah.
Much love to all of you. Very sorry about that non-fawn. That was.
Wait, yeah.
How do you think Bruning won? Like, I don't know.
Before we get to Charsky, real quick. What's
yes.
So you say that the paper's bad because like they're switching from a first come first serve system or whatever, which is a
I just don't think it's particularly impressive that like the internal pricing system beat out the first come first serve system for like it was like a bunch of food banks. Like I would expect that having an internal pricing system would outcompete would make you more efficient than.
I would just what would be like the better system that would be price based.
Prices are like I've read Neura. Don't you know that goods are not comparable?
True.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, what would we expect to do better than the first come first serve system that would also be like some central planning or whatever?
For that one specifically, I mean, food banks are weird firms in a lot of ways, so I wouldn't want to generalize from that. But I would expect, having some sort of internal accounting system for predicting shortages based on just the actual, rather than giving like the single unit of account where they're buying and selling things, like breaking it down into the actual goods that they're going to need and what they're going to be expected to. Although actually for something like food where it is just genuinely like a pretty uniform kind of good, I might think that like I would probably expect a pricing system to perform better there than alternatives, but
okay, sure.
Yeah.
Right. Charsky, how do you think Bruning won? He lost. Like, I was rooting for Bruning, but he lost on substance. He lost on rhetoric.
The rhetorically, I think so. Here's I think I'm really sad the immigration point didn't get discussed, Marcus. I think that's really interesting. And I think that if you weigh that, I think obviously Bruning loses because it's just it's going to outweigh basically all of Bruning's stuff. But they both of them just never really went into it, and so I think it's hard to weigh that. But I think that like what Kaplan doesn't dispute is that the welfare state effectively prevents poverty, right? And so it hinges on whether or not the welfare state is in some way immoral. And I think on that, Matt is able to effectively.
No, I agree. I agree. He would have won, but that was not the main topic of the debate. But for the debate, so first of all, Kaplan said stuff like the success sequence that Matt, even though he knows about this, he just completely forgot to dispute that. So that's a big point of success that he just completely ignored.
I agree. Matt could have done better, but I think that like the success sequence stuff, like Matt said, I think there was like a mutual like kind of ignoring a bunch of stuff that could have been a lot more of an interesting debate. Because I also even the stuff they did discuss, I don't think they got into the like because Kaplan has like a pretty strong theory of dessert, right? And I wish that they had gotten into that a lot more.
Yeah, and I don't like that. I don't like Matt's theory of dessert, but that's on another topic. I feel like just Matt had a lot of bad optical moments when like Brian.
I do think just not being able to say, yeah, sure, I guess it's free market in that sense was
exactly.
Yeah. I don't know why you don't bite that bullet. Yeah.
Like, why are you not? Why are you being difficult? Like it's also like, oh, you cannot do everything you want with your property. Like, come on, do you not know what free market means? You've never used that word ever in your life, ever. Like,
yeah, I think that was a good point from Kaplan, right? That like obviously, exactly. I think obviously Brent uses that.
I think he failed to track when he asked them about roles, like which roles is that, the globalist roles or the roles that suddenly cares about countries,
about national boundaries.
Like,
sure, yeah.
Then he's like, oh no, veil of ignorance. Like that was not the question. I feel like that's bad. I'm struggling to think of a single point that Matt had the edge on, except for maybe the end where he says like, actually, welfare is compatible with housing.
Yeah, I can't believe you didn't mention that earlier.
I think he has the edge there, but I also think that in terms of, I just think sort of Kaplan presents his theory of dessert and why he thinks that like, all else equal, there's some, real big wrong in like taxation based redistribution or whatever. And I think, I don't think that survived the debate, right? Like I think Matt is pretty effectively able to, give reasons to think that's not true. Because I think that like, I mean, I wish Matt. This is why Matt needs to read Jesse's
Bias moderation too, I will say.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, Econoboy is. I mean, I think Econoboy did an all right job, but obviously, he's
he barely spoke. No, but I don't know. I expected Kaplan to. I expected the debate to be just about welfare, and I was like, what does he know about welfare? I also don't like that Matt is just like, oh, we can just do cross country comparison. Like that's dog shit. That's trash. Sorry.
Well, it's something. I mean, if you like Kaplan, I think kind of gave up the empirical debate pretty quick, right? And just ended up just saying, well, it's kind of hazy, so we have to rely on intuition, which I thought was very gay.
Yeah. I mean, he said that for like stuff like saving. Like, he said like
which it's true, obviously, that it is hazy. It's very difficult to get good causal inferences, but I don't think that what that means is we have to default to whichever story feels more intuitive, right?
Yeah. I feel like so. I also am inclined to think Kaplan won because if you interpret the debate proposition to be just like which policies reducing poverty, then obviously immigration, like free immigration, would reduce poverty.
Sure.
Like welfare in rich countries. Just not.
I agree that. Yeah, like I said, the immigration point I think is one that because it went sort of both unfocused on by Kaplan and I mean, there was a little bit of
by Matt.
Yeah. There was an interesting. I thought the idea that the Gulf countries are a really good example of open borders success was space.
No slavery.
Yeah.
Awesome. I agree with that.
Yeah. I love the Gulf monarchies. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying, but yeah.
And Matt is, I don't know. I feel like Matt could also.
I think he's a bit out of practice.
He started talking about like sovereign wealth funds in the middle. It's like not too related.
Yeah.
I also don't like his theory of entitlement. So like it's very unoptical when you say, "Oh, I think the government owns everything you have." By the way,
like, I think it's unoptical. I mean, this is why you have to. Maybe I'll email him. I'll send him. I'll try to Spafford pill him because I think you just. All of the, I mean, and he's done this before and better. The Yaron Brooks debate, I think, was a very good version of the argument he should have given, right? Like, I think he gave.
Oh yeah, he destroyed.
He PTFO'd Yaron, yeah.
He destroyed him completely. Like I wanted Matt to win. I like him pro welfare. I wanted Matt to win. But that's the cost of you pay when you're like an egalitarian cook. Just be egalitarian. Just be. It's so much easier. It's just like these people suffer, have a higher marginal utility to dollars, so just give them that money. But I don't need Charsky. You care about inequality, right? I'll ask you the question that no egalitarian can answer.
Yeah.
When I say what measure, I don't mean luck egalitarianism, outcome egalitarianism, equality of opportunity. I mean what measure? Like how do you measure inequality? Gini, Atkinson measure, shares? Like what? How do you measure it?
I think most. Well, the issue is I think that most egalitarians aren't purely concerned with economic equality, right? Like so I think that probably. Yeah, I mean it's probably
whatever stuff you care about. Whatever stuff you care about, whether it's lifelong utility or dollars or health or whatever things we care about. We have a distribution of these in the country. How do we get a measure of equality that is morally relevant? Is Gini the morally relevant measure? Is it Atkinson?
I don't know. I mean, in my mind, this feels a lot like asking the utilitarian, where are the utils, right? Like where the
no, because asking the utilitarian, we do have the formula. It's just the expected value. It's the sum. Well,
sure. But the point is, I guess that. It seems like what you were asking was something like
give you care about. How do you extract from that the inequality? Like how do you get?
Oh, sure. Given that you have the the utils or whatever units of advantage.
Inequality is the one that matters. Is it Gini? Is it Atkinson?
I don't have strong views on that, but
I don't know how you derive that. That seems a problem. That seems like a problem. If it's just
sure. Yeah, well, I'm not sure I understand the problem you're trying to draw because it seems like. Wait, what you're saying either is something like the where are the utils thing, or I'm not sure what you're saying, right?
It's like if someone says, I want numbers that are pretty. It's like, okay, okay. Like 1, 2, 3 is a pretty number, but like 17, 29, that's not it. I'm giving that number. It's a math meme, by the way. But yeah, that number is not pretty. It's like, okay, cool. Okay, given a number, we know what numbers are, whatever the numbers measure, we have them. We have the numbers now. How do you determine if a number is pretty? And they're like, oh, I don't know, it's vibes. It's like, okay, that seems a bit bad. Maybe for subjective.
Wait, are you asking how, like, if we have the units of advantage, how do I determine what's unequal? What do you?
We have a
that seems
distribution of numbers. How
right.
do you measure the inequality there? Like, what's the given a distribution of numbers, whatever they measure, whether it's utility or happiness or whatever,
Units of advantage.
everything is morally relevant. Given the distribution, how do you get the level of inequality? Is it Gini coefficient? Is it an Atkinson measure?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I don't know that I have strong opinions on that.
Yeah, but how would you derive it? Like, is it?
I don't know that you could derive it, but I think probably what you'd want to do is you'd consider cases, see what sort of fits into what you think matters in terms of inequality, right? So you can give and probably there are going to be some unintuitive conclusions on some measures, and you're going to find the one that best matches your intuitions.
That's the problem. Like if you use stuff like I've seen papers that extend Gini for negative numbers and also some papers that make Gini subgroup consistent. Look, I don't know. So, some measures of inequality have some problems. Like the traditional Gini cannot be quantified over negative numbers. So there's at least one entity in history that had a negative amount of what we care about.
Yeah.
We cannot use traditional Gini anymore to say that. I don't know. Is it?
Okay.
Maybe it's variance. Maybe it's simple variance. I don't know what people care about. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. There's probably. I need to read more distributive justice stuff. I think that my politics, I have egalitarian intuitions, and I think that a lot of the popular arguments against egalitarianism aren't successful. But I also think that my politics don't rely on I think you can be a simple utilitarian, and I think my conclusions are still the ones you should pursue. But
I'm an egalitarian in the sense
that's what I care about. But I gotta.
Yeah.
Okay.
I gotta get to bed at some point. You got obviously there's other VCs in the server, but I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna end my stream.
I will
see you
say,
guys.
Deal with that, big bro.
I also feel uneasy when people are like, "That's so unequal." But I also feel uneasy when I say sentences that I know are trivial. Like, for example, a quarter of the population is at the bottom quartile of the distribution.
Sure. Yeah.
I say that. I feel bad when I say that. That's completely trivial. So
Sure.
True.
once I conditionalize, I don't feel bad anymore.
Yeah, I won't keep non-fun.
All right.
Bye. No, I'm fine.
Yeah,
I love
no worries. I'll see you guys.
I love you. I love
Wow.
you romantically.
Okay. Incredible. Well, okay, fun time. I will be streaming again tomorrow, I think. If nothing else, to watch the Micah Irfan debate, Daniel DiMartino on the Venezuela strikes, just because I'm familiar with both of them. I know Micah hasn't debated in a while, so I'm excited to see that. And I just think it'll be funny. Quite frankly. I think they're both relatively intelligent people, but I think Daniel DiMartino is like a Venezuelan refugee or whatever. I think he kind of just brain broken on that issue, honestly. But I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be funny. I'm excited to see Micah debate. I haven't really seen Daniel DiMartino debate in this format, I guess. I've seen him do some lecture stuff and I think talk to some students, but not 1v1 online format. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. And yeah, love streaming. Love to guys watch me stream. Cool that I can set up fun little debates like this and do stuff like that, and people watch me having shrimp alfredo tonight. Horrible sauce bravo. But level to regular viewers coming back. Okay, hating on the socialism. Okay, hating on the neoclassical price theory. Okay. And I'll see y'all tomorrow. I'm actually get to rate a different person this time because I'm ending stream at a different time. I have not slept since I ended stream last time at 4 a.m. Well, technically today. So I'm a little tired at this point. See you guys tomorrow. Head over to fucking Queeman, I guess. Tell him I say hi. He Queeman, big non-fun fan, as is known. So see you guys later. Love you guys. Hell